In today's video, we examine the most scary 2026 Bigfoot footage captured on camera. From a group of hikers in Ohio whose trail cameras begin picking up Bigfoot movements in the woods around their campsite, to 3 ski patrollers on a routine avalanche survey who start noticing Bigfoot shadowing their every step through a whiteout blizzard. On the South Loop Trail of Zaleski State Forest, the victim was Jenna, 35, an experienced solo hiker whose call log showed she'd walked these ridges over 200 times. Her phone survived, and what it recorded is the first hard evidence that something in Ohio has changed. Jenna was filming a video blog for her outdoor channel, the camera steady as she pointed out a creek crossing and the way the trail bent around a stand of mature oak. 6 minutes in, she stopped talking about the route. She mentioned the quiet instead, not the normal stillness of deep woods, but a dead silence where no birds called and no insects buzzed. I reconstructed her path from the GPS metadata. She was roughly 4 miles from the parking lot when she tilted her head and whispered into the microphone that the sound she just heard wasn't any bird. It was knocking, wood on wood. That knocking is the first sign of Bigfoot. Jenna kept the phone up. She panned left, then right, then left again. Between 2 massive oaks about 40 yards off the trail, the shadows seemed to thicken. Then the shape resolved itself. A dark, hunched figure stood motionless, its shoulders clearing the lower branches at roughly 8.5 feet. The fur matched the bark so perfectly that the eye rejected the outline at first. Jenna laughed. She said it was probably just a bear, but her breathing had already changed. Shorter inhales, longer exhales, the body preparing for flight. She kept recording for 12 more seconds, just her breath and the faint rustle of her jacket. Then the forest answered. A low, guttural whoop erupted from directly behind her, so close that the phone's microphone peaked into distortion. Bigfoot that had been standing between the oaks hadn't moved. That meant a second Bigfoot had circled behind Jenna while she watched the first one. The whoop lasted 2 full seconds, a sound that vibrates through the audio file like a diesel engine revving inside a concrete room. The phone flew upward. Jenna never screamed. The video shows a spinning blur of leaves and sky, and then a massive fur-covered arm reaching through the frame from the bottom edge. That arm belonged to Bigfoot behind her. From the scale of the oak leaves in the background, I calculated the arm's length at over 5 feet from shoulder to knuckle. The fingers were already curling into a fist. The arm wasn't grabbing, it was swinging. The video cut to black, but the audio continued for another 47 minutes. The first sound after impact was a wet crack, the same forensic signature I've heard in cases where a human skull meets a steel beam at speed. Jenna's breathing stopped instantly. Then came the heavy drag. Bigfoot pulled her body across the forest floor, the phone recording every root snag and every rock scrape. Each dragging interval lasted roughly 8 seconds, followed by 2 seconds of silence, where I could hear Bigfoot adjusting its grip. The huffing was rhythmic, 1 exhale every 3 seconds, the lung capacity of an animal that weighed well over 600 pounds. 23 minutes into the audio, a second Bigfoot vocalized from the east. The whoop was lower in pitch, almost interrogative. The first Bigfoot answered with a series of short grunts, and the dragging changed direction. The body was being pulled toward the second Bigfoot. I mapped the change in ambient sound, more leaf litter, fewer stones, and determined that the new heading was downhill, toward a ravine that local hunters avoid because dogs refuse to enter it. 31 minutes in, the dragging stopped. Bigfoot huffed 3 times in quick succession, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of something large feeding in the dark, not tearing, not chewing. The audio showed a pattern of sustained, wet ripping, followed by 2 seconds of swallowing, then another rip. Each rip lasted approximately 4 seconds. The consistency suggests Bigfoot was opening the chest cavity. A human body has natural separation points between the ribs. Bigfoot knew exactly where to pull. At 39 minutes, the feeding paused. Bigfoot made a sound I can only describe as a low, vibrating hum, something between a growl and a purr. Then the second Bigfoot approached. I could hear its footsteps, each one separated by a 6-foot stride, the weight-crushing leaves with a dull crunch. The 2 Bigfoot vocalized back and forth for nearly 2 minutes. The first one's hum dropped in pitch. The second one answered with a series of soft clicks. Then they both fed at the same time. The audio became a stereo field of wetwork, ripping on the left channel, crunching on the right, the 2 Bigfoot working opposite ends of the same body. 44 minutes. One of Bigfoot stepped directly onto the phone. The microphone compressed into the soil and the audio turned muffled and distant, but it still recorded. For the final 3 minutes, I heard Bigfoot dragging something heavier than a single body. The second Bigfoot had joined the pull. Their footsteps synchronized, the weight distribution suggesting they were carrying Jenna's remains between them. Then the audio ended. They had moved beyond the phone's range, deeper into the ravine. The phone was found 3 days later, crushed but recoverable. Jenna's body has never been located. She was the first of 8 in 5 days. Something is happening in Ohio, and Bigfoot is no longer content to knock on trees and fade into the bark. In the Pleasant Hill Dam area of Mohican Memorial State Forest, the second-day victims were 3 15-year-olds, Caleb, Mia, and Jordan, out for a birthday hike on a sunny October afternoon. Their case holds the strangest evidence I've reviewed. Not a single frame of trail cam footage shows the teenagers themselves. Instead, the cameras captured Bigfoot walking toward an empty forest, and yet the physical remains tell a story of 3 people being eaten alive right there. The hunter's cellular trail cam was strapped to a tree overlooking a creek bed, aimed at a sycamore and a patch of ferns. 6 seconds of footage, no audio. Second one shows an empty forest, the sycamore's white bark standing out against the brown undergrowth. Second 2, a massive dark shape begins to emerge from behind the sycamore, moving with a slow, deliberate care that suggests Bigfoot knew exactly where the camera was. The color is gray-brown, the fur matted in patches like wet bark. Second 3, Bigfoot is fully visible. I've scaled it against the sycamore's trunk, a tree with a known diameter of 22 inches. Bigfoot stands just over 9 feet tall, shoulders hunched forward in a way that adds another foot to its reach, arms hanging past its knees. Second 4, 1 step closer. The head lifts. Sunken eyes sit deep under a sloping brow ridge, and there is no visible neck, just a wedge of muscle connecting skull to torso. Second 5, another step. The face becomes distinguishable. A scarred ridge of tissue runs over the left eye socket, the hair gone in that spot, revealing gray skin beneath. The jaw hangs slightly open. Second 6, a third step. The frame fills with Bigfoot's torso, a wall of fur and muscle, then static. The footage ends. No hikers appear in any of those 6 seconds. Bigfoot was walking toward the creek bed where, according to witness statements, Caleb, Mia, and Jordan had stopped to eat lunch at 2:15 p.m. The missing persons report confirms the 3 teenagers never returned home. Their parents called at 9:47 p.m. Searchers found the site within 4 hours. The physical evidence tells me Bigfoot didn't stalk them. It simply arrived. 3 day packs lay scattered within a 50-foot radius of the creek bed. One pack, Caleb's, was crushed flat as if stepped on by something weighing well over 600 pounds. The fabric hadn't torn. It had compressed, the zippers still zipped, the water bottle inside reduced to shards. Another pack, Mia's, was ripped open with a violence that pulled the seams apart rather than cutting them. A water bottle, granola bars, and a phone were strewn across the ground in a pattern consistent with a single sweeping motion. The third pack, Jordan's, was intact but pinned under a fallen branch measuring 8 feet long and 6 inches thick. I cross-referenced the local weather. No wind that day. The branch didn't fall. It was placed. Near the creek, a flat rock roughly 3 feet across bore a massive bloodstain covering 2 square feet. On the same rock, I found 3 distinct bite marks, each approximately 2 inches in diameter, pressed deep into the stone's surface. Not scratches, not dents. The rock had fractured around each bite. Forensic analysis confirmed human bone fragments embedded in the impressions, specifically fragments of a human femur and tibia. The bite force required to mark stone has been estimated at over 1,600 pounds per square inch. That is not a bear. That is not a mountain lion. That is a Bigfoot biting through a 15-year-old's leg bone and leaving a record of its tooth pattern in solid rock. 50 feet up a mature white oak, searchers found a single half-eaten hiking boot, size 7, male, matching Caleb's footwear. The boot was wedged between 2 branches, measuring just 1.2 inches in diameter. I've climbed enough trees to know that no human could have placed it there. The branches would have snapped under 150 pounds, let alone whatever weight carried that boot up. On the same tree, at 15 feet high, the bark showed 3 deep parallel gouges. Each gouge was spaced roughly 4 inches apart. I held a cast of those gouges next to a cast of Bigfoot's fingerprints from another case. The match was perfect. Bigfoot climbed that tree, boot in mouth, and left its claw marks on the way up. The clearest evidence came from the mud leading away from the rock. A single footprint cast measured 17 inches long, 8 inches wide at the heel, with 5 distinct toe impressions. The stride length between steps was 6.5 feet. That stride carried Bigfoot toward a steep ravine about 40 yards east. But at the ravine edge, searchers found something else. 3 separate handprints pressed into the mud, each one small, consistent with teenage hands. The fingers were splayed wide, the palm heels dug deep, as if each person had tried to stop themselves from being dragged forward. Beyond those handprints, no further human tracks, no footprints, no knee prints, no signs of struggle. Only the 17-inch prints continued, one after another, descending into the ravine. The lead investigator's final note on the report reads, as I paraphrase it, 3 hikers, 1 trail cam that caught nothing but a Bigfoot walking toward an empty frame, and yet the evidence shows they were killed and consumed right there on that rock. The lead investigator wrote that he doesn't know how something that big moves that fast, but it does. Bigfoot that took Caleb, Mia, and Jordan didn't chase them. It simply arrived, fed, and walked away. The handprints at the ravine edge tell me the teenagers saw it coming. They had time to brace, and it didn't matter. The 3rd day of Bigfoot's spree was on the Boston Run Trail in Cuyahoga Valley National Park. The victim was Maya, 26, a competitive trail runner who logged over 70 miles a week on these very paths, but this time she wouldn't return. The only evidence in the case came from her sister, a phone call that lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds, before dissolving into something I've had to rebuild from cellular metadata and acoustic forensics. The evidence paints a clear picture. Maya was running a route she knew cold when something locked onto her. The call came in at 6:42 p.m. Maya's sister answered to the sound of heavy breathing, not from exertion alone, but from something closer to panic. Maya was gasping out words between strides, her pace audibly faster than a casual jog. She said something was tracking her through the trees to her right, staying exactly parallel no matter how she adjusted her line. She described it as not a deer, because deer bolt when a human sprints. This thing was holding formation. Maya pushed her pace to a 6-minute mile, flat-out racing speed on uneven forest trail, and the shape in the timber just kept matching her, step for step, branch for branch. Then her sister heard it. Behind Maya's breathing, behind the crunch of her trail shoes on gravel and leaf litter, came a second set of footfalls, heavy, bipedal. The rhythm was unmistakable. 2 slow, powerful strides for every one of Maya's rapid steps. Each footfall landed with a low thud that vibrated through the phone's microphone, the kind of weight that compresses soil and fractures roots. I've analyzed the cadence against Maya's reported 6-minute mile pace. For a human to match that speed, the stride length would need to exceed 5 feet. This Bigfoot was taking strides of nearly 8 feet, covering ground with an economy of motion that should not be possible for a creature its size. Maya whispered, not spoke, not yelled, whispered, as if saying the word too loudly would bring it down on her. She said the word Bigfoot, and in that whisper, I hear the final moment when denial gives way to certainty. Her sister started shouting into the phone, telling Maya to get off the trail, to climb a rock face, to do anything. But the footfalls behind Maya had changed. They were no longer 2 beats for every one of hers. They were closing, 1 beat for every stride, then 1 beat for every 2 of hers. Bigfoot was accelerating. Then the call flooded with static, not the crackle of a dropped signal or the hiss of distance. This was a roar of digital noise, rhythmic and pulsing, surging and receding at a rate of roughly 1 cycle per second. Forensic audio specialists have identified this signature before. It matches the waveform of infrasound, frequencies below the range of human hearing, but felt in the chest as pressure and in the brain as raw animal terror. Bigfoot was not just chasing Maya, it was broadcasting a low-frequency pulse that would have locked her joints, slowed her thoughts, turned her flight into a stagger. Her sister heard Maya yell, "No." Then the stomp. The audio texts describe it as a pumpkin being dropped from a 2-story window, that wet, explosive collapse of something hollow and fluid-filled. I've listened to the cleaned-up version. It's the sound of a human rib cage caving in under a single downward strike. Bigfoot did not need to chase Maya down. It had already matched her pace for nearly half a mile. When it finally closed the gap, it ended the pursuit with one blow. The line went dead at 6:47 p.m., but the phone did not. Cell tower pings tracked Maya's device for another 7 minutes, traveling roughly 4 miles off any marked trail. I mapped the trajectory. The phone moved south-southwest, crossing 2 creek beds and a ridgeline that requires scrambling over a 15-foot sandstone ledge. No human body being dragged could cover that terrain in 7 minutes, but a Bigfoot could. The ping intervals show acceleration, faster and faster, as Bigfoot carried the phone deeper into the park's undeveloped eastern section. Then the pings stopped. Not a slow fade, an abrupt termination. The phone either destroyed or buried. Maya's body has never been found. Her phone has never been found. The only thing that remains is the call, the static, the stomp, and the 7-minute ghost trail of a Bigfoot carrying evidence away from human eyes. In Shawnee State Forest, known as the Little Smokies of Ohio, the victims were Lauren, 38, and her 13-year-old son, Eli. They had planned a bonding hike, a 3-day trek through the most remote terrain in southern Ohio. Search teams found Lauren's day pack within 48 hours, placed on a fallen log with almost ceremonial precision. No tears in the fabric, no scattered contents, just the pack, upright, untouched. Beside it sat a can of bear spray, and that told the real story. The bear spray can was completely empty. Not partially discharged, not leaking. Every ounce of capsaicin had been expelled in a single sustained burst. Around the can, the ground showed a dark, scorched arc of dried spray, radiating outward in a perfect semicircle, roughly 15 feet in diameter. I reconstructed the spray pattern from the forensic photos. The arc suggests Lauren stood her ground, aimed the can, and swept it across a target that was moving laterally in front of her. She did everything right. She waited until Bigfoot was within 20 feet. She depressed the trigger and held it down. The spray pattern shows no flinch, no panic drift. Lauren knew how to use bear spray, but inside that arc, pressed into the mud of the trail, was a single footprint, 17 inches long from heel to toe. The cast shows clear dermal ridges, the friction ridges of a Bigfoot's foot, the same unique swirls that human fingerprints have. No boot tread, no flat impressions, actual skin. Bigfoot had walked directly through the cloud of burning chemicals and never broken stride. The spray did nothing. Not a cough, not a blink, not a flinch. Bigfoot simply passed through the hot orange cloud as if it were morning mist. The footprint faces the direction of the can, meaning Bigfoot advanced on Lauren while she emptied the entire can into its face. 30 feet from the day pack, a mature oak tree had been peeled of its bark from 2 feet above ground up to 10 feet high. I measured the scars. The bark removal was not random, it was systematic. A single massive creature reaching up and dragging its back against the trunk with enough force to shred the outer layer down to bare wood. The claw marks were spaced 6 inches apart, consistent with the finger spread of a hand that spans nearly 14 inches across the palm. The height of the peeled section confirms Bigfoot's shoulder clearance at over 8 feet. This was not territorial marking. This was a scratch. Bigfoot had used the tree the way a black bear uses a pine, rubbing against it to relieve an itch or to deposit scent. But the force required to strip bark from a mature oak at that height is beyond any bear. Bigfoot had leaned its full weight into that trunk and dragged downward, leaving fur caught in the fresh wood fibers. Search teams reported a smell clinging to the entire area. Wet fur, not the musky odor of a dog or the sharp tang of a bear, but something deeper, almost like a horse that has been standing in rain for days. Underneath that, rotting meat, the sweet, sickly smell of decomposition that hangs in the air and coats the back of the throat. The odor persisted for 3 days after the search teams first arrived, even after rain moved through the forest. I've talked to forest rangers who worked bear kills and mountain lion scavenges. None of them had ever encountered a smell that lingered through a rainstorm. Eli's ball cap was found inside a hollow log 40 yards from the day pack. The log was an old sycamore, split open along its length, the interior chamber just wide enough for a 13-year-old boy to curl into. The cap was not tossed in. It was crushed into a perfect bowl shape, the brim folded under, the crown compressed down until the fabric was as flat as a pressed flower. The force required to crush a baseball cap into that shape without tearing the stitching is specific. Something had pressed the cap down with steady, even pressure. Not a grab, not a twist, but a deliberate flattening. I reconstructed the scene from the impressions. Bigfoot had removed Eli's cap, placed it inside the log, and then pushed down with the heel of its hand until the cap conformed to the curve of the wood. No blood on the cap, no hair, no tissue, just the faint smell of wet fur pressed into the cotton. No bodies were ever found. The search teams expanded their grid to a 2-mile radius and found nothing. No drag marks, no disturbed leaf litter beyond the immediate area of the pack and the tree. It was as if Lauren and Eli had simply stopped existing at that spot. But the bear spray can told me they fought. The footprint told me Bigfoot walked through their best defense without even slowing down. The peeled tree told me Bigfoot was comfortable here at home, treating the forest like its own living room. And the crushed ball cap told me that somewhere in these woods, a 13-year-old boy was close enough to his mother that Bigfoot had to remove his hat before it took him. She emptied a whole can of spray into that creature's face. Bigfoot took her son anyway. Then it came back for her. In Wayne National Forest's Wildcat Hollow, the final victim was Eleanor, 68, a retired biologist with 40 years of field experience who knew the difference between animal sign and human interference. She had been documenting fungi for a local mycology club when she wandered off trail near a cluster of sandstone boulders. Her journal was found 3 days later, wedged between 2 roots, and the last entry tells me everything about what she saw. The handwriting starts firm but grows shakier with each line, the pen pressing harder into the page as if her hand was trembling. Eleanor wrote that something had been watching her since noon. She had mistaken it for a boulder at first, just another moss-covered rock in the jumble of talus. Then the boulder blinked. The creature rose from its crouch, and Eleanor estimated its height at 8 feet of an inch. She was a biologist. She did not exaggerate measurements. She wrote that this was not an animal, but an executioner, and the word choice chills me because it implies intent. Animals kill to eat. Executioners kill because they have been ordered to. Eleanor asked whoever found the journal to tell the rangers that she saw the alpha, a Bigfoot with a scar over its left eye, and that it was not alone. The journal ends there, the final letters trailing off as if she closed the notebook mid-thought. Outside, 70 yards from where the journal was found, search teams discovered a structure that does not belong in any natural forest. A nest of broken saplings woven together into a bowl shape roughly 6 feet across and 3 feet deep. The saplings were green wood, snapped off at the base with a twisting motion, then bent and interlaced in a pattern that required hand strength far beyond any known primate in North America. Bigfoot had built this nest recently. The leaves on the broken branches had not yet wilted. Inside the nest, the evidence turned from strange to horrific. Eleanor's glasses, folded neatly, the lenses unbroken. Her left boot removed cleanly with the laces still tied, meaning the foot had been pulled out rather than the boot untied, and a fragment of her titanium hip replacement chewed into a crumpled ball the size of a walnut. Titanium has a tensile strength of over 100,000 pounds per square inch. Bigfoot had bitten down on that metal implant with enough force to deform it permanently. Human bite marks cannot do that. Bear bite marks cannot do that. The dentition pattern on the crumpled ball shows large, blunt cusps spaced roughly an inch apart, the molar row of a Bigfoot. 100 yards from the nest, Eleanor's camera stood on its tripod, still recording. The battery had run down to 3% by the time searchers found it, but the memory card held 47 minutes of footage. I've reviewed the entire file. The first 30 minutes show Eleanor setting up the camera, adjusting the angle, and then walking away from it toward the boulder field. Her movements are normal at first, purposeful, scientific, the gait of someone surveying a transect. But around the 32-minute mark, something changes. Eleanor reappears from behind a large sandstone outcropping, and her posture is wrong. Her arms hang at her sides, not swinging with her stride. Her head is tilted slightly upward, her eyes fixed on something above the camera's frame. She walks past the tripod without acknowledging it, heading directly toward the nest. The footage shows Eleanor walking willingly. That is the word I have to use, because there is no rope, no weapon, no threat visible in the frame. Her arms are outstretched now, palms forward, the posture of someone approaching a ledge or a cliff edge with full knowledge of what waits below. Her mouth is moving, but the camera's microphone was too far away to pick up words. She reaches the edge of the nest and stops. For 3 seconds, she stands there, arms still out, head still tilted. Then she steps forward into the bowl of broken saplings, and she does not step back out. The final 12 seconds of footage are why I cannot stop thinking about this case. A massive face fills the frame from the left side, moving so smoothly that the camera does not register a shake. Bigfoot has inserted itself between the lens and Eleanor's last known unknown position. The face is not the flat, ape-like reconstruction from old drawings. It is broad, with a pronounced brow ridge that casts deep shadows over the eyes. The left eye is partially closed by a thick scar that runs from the forehead down across the eyelid and onto the cheekbone. The scar is pale against the dark fur, healed long ago, but still visible as a raised line of tissue. No threat display, no bared teeth, just a slow, deliberate head tilt, the same gesture a human makes when examining something unfamiliar. Then the camera goes dead. The battery had power remaining. The memory card was not full. Bigfoot turned the camera off. By day 5, the Rangers had 8 missing persons across 5 separate crime scenes, all within Ohio. I reviewed the victim profiles. The female victims range from 26 to 68. The male victims are all children. No adult men have been taken. That pattern tells me something that the footprints and the nests and the chewed titanium do not. Bigfoot are selecting. They are not attacking every human they encounter. They are choosing specific targets. And the alpha, the scarred Bigfoot that Eleanor identified, is the common denominator across multiple scenes. Witnesses in 2 other instances described a large Bigfoot with a facial scar, always appearing just before the attack escalated. The question that keeps me up is not whether the alpha is doing this alone. The question is, how many more are following its orders? On June 4, 2026, I filmed the clearest Bigfoot sighting ever captured, and I nearly didn't make it back to show anyone. I was pinned between 2 of them with no signal, and the most mind-blowing footage sitting on my SD card. What happened on that ridge that morning is the most terrifying moment I've ever experienced. My name is Aaron Granger. I'm 43 years old and based in the Pacific Northwest. I've spent most of my adult life outdoors. For nearly 15 years, I worked in trail maintenance, starting before sunrise and spending long days alone in remote landscapes that most people only ever glimpse from a car window. These days, I spend my weekends doing wilderness photography. It's not a profession or a side business, it's simply how I reconnect with the places that have always felt like home. Most of my trips out there are forgettable in the best way. June 4th was the one where I found myself stuck on a ridge with Bigfoot, standing between me and my car, thinking this might genuinely be how it ends for me. The area I'd picked sits deep inside a stretch of old-growth Douglas fir in the Pacific Northwest that most people don't bother with. No maintained trails or markers, no cell reception past the first quarter mile. The kind of place where if something goes wrong, I know nobody's coming. I'd known about it from my trail work days. We skirted the edges of it occasionally, but never went in. The locals who knew the area didn't really talk about why they avoided it. They just did. I never pushed on that. I probably should have. A guy I used to work with on trail crews mentioned the area a few months earlier. He said the eastern ridge caught the morning light perfectly, and that he'd always wanted to photograph it, but never got around to it. That was enough to put the idea in my head. I picked a Thursday, set my alarm, and figured I'd be in and out before most people were even awake. Simple enough. I also came more prepared than usual for this one. A few days before, I'd driven out to the area to scout it and planted a trail camera on a tree upslope from the ridge, motion activated, running for days by the time Thursday came. I also packed my thermal monocular and clipped a GoPro to my bag. I wanted as many angles as possible. Not fear exactly, more like that nagging feeling you get when you're halfway down the road and suddenly can't remember whether you locked the front door. Nothing concrete, nothing I could point to, just a persistent sense that I'd forgotten something important. I packed my gear anyway and told myself it was nothing. I parked just off the logging road at around 3:50 that morning. The first thing I noticed was the cold, and I mean really cold. Not just the usual pre-dawn chill. This was June. It had no business being that temperature. Out of habit, I checked my phone. No signal, which was exactly what I expected. I geared up, switched on my headlamp, and started hiking in. The darkness felt different too. I've done plenty of pre-dawn shoots over the years, and normally there's something familiar about being out there before sunrise. The woods have their own rhythm. You hear insects, the occasional bird, branches moving in the wind. Even in the dark, it feels alive. That morning, none of that was there. The forest was quiet enough that I could hear my own footsteps echoing back through the trees. About 10 minutes in, I stopped and swept my headlamp across the trail. Actually, before that, I stopped at the trail camera first, checked the feed quickly. Still armed, still recording, nothing significant on it yet. I remounted it and kept moving. It had rained a couple of days earlier, and the soil was still soft enough to hold tracks clearly. I expected to see the usual signs of movement: deer, raccoons, maybe a coyote. There was nothing. I crouched down and looked more closely, thinking maybe I was missing something. But the trail was clean. No hoof prints, no paw prints, nothing that suggested an animal had passed through recently. That wasn't normal. In a stretch of forest like that, something is always moving, especially at night. Even if you don't see it, you see the evidence. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the ground, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. Then I got back to my feet and kept walking. I should have turned around right then. I'd been on the trail for about 20 minutes when every sound around me stopped. Not gradually either. It wasn't like one bird went quiet and then another. It all vanished at once. If you've spent enough time in the woods, you learn to pay attention to things like that. Back when I was doing trail work, I learned that kind of silence usually means something large is nearby. The animals know before you do. I stopped where I was and listened. I raised the thermal monocular first. No point reaching for the main camera yet. There was no visible light to work with. I pointed it upslope and immediately picked up a heat signature. Large. Much larger than a deer, just sitting there in the thermal, stationary, about 80 yards up. My headlamp was still on. After a second, I clicked it off and stood there in the dark, waiting. I figured I'd hear something eventually, a branch snapping, movement in the brush, anything that would explain it. But nothing did. The silence didn't break. It just stayed there, pressing in from every direction. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. Still nothing. That's when I saw it. I continued watching through the thermal scope and noticed that the heat signature had started moving. It was upright, large, and appeared to be bipedal. The thermal imaging confirmed what my eyes still could not make out through the trees. There was movement in the tree line maybe 80 or 90 yards upslope from where I was standing. At first, it was just a shape slipping between the trunks. My eyes kept losing it and finding it again. I remember thinking it had to be a bear. A black bear can look surprisingly human in bad light. I've had them stand up on hind legs before. I've watched them move through brush at dawn when all you can really make out is a silhouette. But this wasn't doing what a bear does. It wasn't stopping to sniff. It wasn't weaving around obstacles or dropping down on all fours. It was covering ground in a straight line, moving between the trees with long, measured strides. I found myself trying to judge its height against the surrounding timber. Every time it passed a trunk, it seemed bigger than my brain wanted it to be. Then I thought maybe it was a person. But then, nobody should have been out there at that hour. Even if someone was, the nearest access point was miles away. I remember noticing how little of it I could actually see. The trees kept breaking up the outline. 1 second, I'd catch a shoulder, or what looked like a shoulder, then a leg, then just darkness again. But every glimpse gave me the same impression: upright, broad, and far larger than anything I expected to find in those woods. I didn't move or make a sound. I just stood there staring into the trees, waiting for it to become something I could recognize. I don't know exactly when the decision clicked, but at some point my hands just went to the camera. I'd been shooting long exposures earlier that morning, so it was already set up for low light. High sensitivity, wide open aperture, everything tuned for the conditions. I switched it over to video, kept my movements slow, and pressed record. It was too dark, too far away, and the trees kept breaking up the outline. I figured the camera might catch details I was missing at the moment, so I kept recording. The GoPro on my bag had been running the whole session. I'd clipped it on before I left the car and hadn't thought about it since. It was pointed back behind me, passively capturing everything I couldn't see. I didn't realize how important that would turn out to be until much later. The sky was just starting to change by then, that deep blue-gray light you get maybe 20 minutes before sunrise. There was finally enough light filtering through the canopy to separate shapes from shadows. That's when it stepped out of the tree line. It was completely upright. The size of it stopped me cold. Even at that distance, something about its proportions felt wrong. What bothered me more was how still it was. When an animal freezes, it doesn't stay perfectly motionless. There's always some movement, a shift in weight, a turn of the head, something. This thing didn't seem to move at all. I tightened my grip on the camera and kept filming. Earlier in the session, I'd photographed a Douglas fir about 70 yards upslope. I knew that tree. I'd framed a shot around it maybe an hour before, and I had a decent sense of its height, somewhere around 13, 14 feet tall. When the figure shifted slightly to the right, it passed directly beside that tree. And what was there? The proportions were all wrong. The arms hung too low, the shoulders were too wide for anything I've ever seen move on two legs. And the way it moved when it shifted, fluid, controlled, no wasted motion. Something that size should lumber. It didn't. It moved like it was completely comfortable in that body, in that terrain, in that dark. The thermal had already told me something was wrong with the size. Now my eyes were confirming it. Two separate devices, same conclusion. I kept the camera on it and tried to find the explanation that made this make sense. I'm still looking. Most wild animals, the second they sense you, they're gone. That's just how it works. A deer, a bear, even a mountain lion. The moment they register a human presence that close, the instinct kicks in and they're out. I've never once had a large animal hold its ground for more than a few seconds when it knew I was there. This thing didn't move for 40 seconds. I know because the timestamp is right there on the footage. 40 seconds of it, just standing in that gray light, completely unbothered, not frozen in the way prey freezes, not sizing up an escape route, just present, aware, like it had decided this was exactly where it was going to be, and nothing about my being there changed that calculation. That's when it stopped feeling like a sighting. 40 seconds doesn't sound like much until you're standing in the dark counting every one of them, watching something that size make no move to leave. That's when it started feeling like something else entirely. Like I wasn't the one doing the observing. And then it turned, not away from me, toward me. The whole upper body rotated in my direction, slow, deliberate, no hesitation. And just like that, everything about this situation changed. Up until that moment, I'd been telling myself I was watching something that didn't know I was there, that I had the distance, the dark, the silence working in my favor, that as long as I didn't move, I was okay. That belief did not survive the turn, because the way it turned, there was no searching in it, no scanning the tree line, no trying to locate the source of a sound. It turned, and it was already looking directly at where I was standing, like it had known the whole time and had simply decided, at that moment, that it was done pretending otherwise. I didn't move. I don't think I breathed. The camera was still running, and some part of my brain was glad about that, because the rest of me had completely stopped functioning normally. Whatever this was, it was no longer something happening at a safe distance. It was looking at me. Then it started moving toward me. Not charging, not lunging, just walking, downslope in my direction, one deliberate step at a time. And I need you to understand something about what that feels like, because it's not what you'd imagine. You'd think the scariest version of this is something coming at you fast. It isn't. Fast at least makes sense. Fast is an animal reacting, a threat responding, something you can categorize. This was slow, unhurried, like it had already decided how this was going to go and saw no reason to rush. Every step it took closed the distance between us, and I could feel the weight of each one even from where I was standing. The ground doesn't lie. Something that size moving toward you has a presence that goes beyond what your eyes are telling you. You feel it in your chest. I still didn't move. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, and I overrode every single one of them because something deeper, something from 20 years of reading situations in the field, told me that running was the worst thing I could do right now. So I stood there, camera up, completely still, watching it close the distance between us, one slow, deliberate step at a time. It didn't stop. 50 yards, maybe less. That's where it stopped, close enough that I could hear it breathing. Not heavily, just the slow, steady rhythm of something completely at ease with the situation it was in. I was not at ease. I was standing completely still with a camera in my hands, trying to calculate whether 50 yards was a survivable distance if this went wrong. It stood there looking in my direction, and I had this feeling, I can't call it anything more than a feeling, that it had known exactly where I was from the moment I walked into that forest. Not from when I raised the camera, not from when the silence dropped. From the beginning, like my arrival hadn't been a surprise to it at all. I told myself I was projecting, that I was scared and reading intentions into behavior I didn't understand. But the feeling didn't go away. It just sat there the same way the figure was sitting there, patient, unbothered, completely in control of whatever this was. And that patience was the most frightening thing I'd encountered so far. That would change. That's when I heard it, behind me. Not upslope where the figure was standing, directly behind me. Movement in the undergrowth, deliberate, heavy, close. The kind of sound that takes about half a second to process and then hits you all at once when it does. I was not alone out there with one of these things. There were two of them. I didn't turn around. Every part of me wanted to, but I didn't, because turning my back on the figure in front of me felt like exactly the wrong move, and keeping my back to whatever was behind me felt just as wrong. So I just stood there, frozen between the two, staring straight ahead at the one I could see, while the one I couldn't see moved through the brush somewhere behind me. The GoPro on my bag was facing backward. It was capturing all of it. I didn't think about that in the moment. I was way past thinking about cameras, but whatever was moving through that undergrowth behind me, whatever was circling, whatever was deciding what to do next, it was all going onto that footage without me even knowing it. I was completely surrounded. At some point, my brain shifted out of pure panic and into something more like damage control. I started thinking about getting out, mapping the route back to the logging road in my head, the trail I'd come in on, the direction of the car, how long it had taken me to walk in. And that's when I realized the figure was standing directly on it, not near it, not beside it, on it. The only navigable route back through that terrain in the dark ran right through where it was positioned. I'd come up the slope from the left, the trail cut back down through the trees on the right, and somewhere in the middle of that was 8 or 9 feet of something that had just walked toward me and stopped. I didn't know if it was deliberate. I still don't know. But here's the thing. It didn't matter. Whether it had positioned itself there on purpose or whether it was coincidence, the result was the same. I had no clean way out. Going off trail in that terrain, in that darkness, with something else moving behind me, wasn't an option. Waiting for it to move wasn't guaranteed, and doing anything that might provoke a reaction from something that size, at that distance, with no help coming, that wasn't an option either. So I ran through my options, methodically, the way you do when panic isn't going to help you, and you know it. Running was out. Off trail in that darkness with uneven terrain, I didn't know well enough. I'd be on the ground in 30 seconds, and whatever was behind me wouldn't need to hurry. Calling out wasn't an option either. No signal, no one within range, and making noise felt like the worst possible idea given everything that was already happening. I thought about the car, 12 minutes away on a good day, moving fast on a known trail, the trail that was blocked. I thought about going wide, cutting through the trees and around the figure's position. But that meant moving directly through whatever was circling behind me, and I wasn't willing to do that. Every option I had carried real physical risk, every single one. And for the first time out there, for the first time in 20 years of solo trips into remote terrain, I genuinely didn't know if I was making it home. Not as a dramatic thought, just as a cold, practical assessment of the situation I was actually in. So I made the only decision that made any sense. I stayed completely still. I kept the camera up, and I waited. I don't know exactly how long it lasted. Time does something strange when you're that scared. My best estimate is somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes, but it felt like it existed outside of any normal measurement. The figure upslope didn't move. It just stayed on that trail, positioned exactly where it was, like it had all the time in the world. Maybe it did. What moved was everything else around me. The presence behind me didn't stay in one place. It shifted, slowly, wide arcs through the undergrowth, moving from my left to my right and back again. Not charging, not retreating, circling, patient and deliberate in a way that felt less like animal behavior and more like something I didn't have a clean word for. Every time I thought it had stopped, I'd hear it again. A branch, a weight shift, something heavy placing one foot deliberately in front of the other, somewhere in the dark behind me. At one point, it moved close enough that I could hear the undergrowth parting. I have no idea how close that actually was. Close enough that I stopped breathing for a while, and through all of it, the forest stayed completely silent in every other way. No birds, no wind, nothing that wasn't directly connected to whatever was happening on that ridge. The whole place had cleared out and left me there alone with them, and the only sounds were the ones I didn't want to hear. Then, slowly, the movement behind me began to pull away. Not all at once. Gradually, the sounds grew quieter, more distant, and then they stopped. I didn't move. I didn't trust it. A few minutes after the sounds behind me went quiet, the figure moved. It didn't lunge, didn't charge. It just turned, the same slow, deliberate rotation it had done when it first faced me, and walked back into the tree line. 3, maybe 4 strides, and the forest swallowed it completely. No crash of branches, no sound of something fleeing. Just a controlled, unhurried exit, like it had somewhere else to be and had simply decided it was time. That's the part I keep coming back to. It didn't leave because I was scared of it. It didn't leave because something startled it, or because the light had changed, or because of anything I did. It left because it chose to, which means everything that came before, the approach, the positioning on the trail, the presence behind me, all of it, that was also a choice. I stood there staring at the spot where it had been for a long time after it disappeared. The forest was still completely silent. Nothing had come back. Nothing was moving. But I didn't feel clear. I didn't feel like it was over just because I couldn't see anything anymore. I don't know how long I stood there after it disappeared. Long enough that my legs started shaking, not from cold, just from the delayed physical response to everything my body had been holding in for the past half hour. I kept listening. That was all I could do. Every few seconds I'd pick a direction and just focus on it. Upslope where the figure had been, behind me where the other one had circled, the tree line to my left, rotating through them slowly, waiting for a sound that would tell me one of them had come back. Nothing came. But here's the thing about silence after something like that. It doesn't feel the same as silence before it. Before, silence was just the absence of sound. After, it feels like something that could end at any moment, like it's conditional, like whatever is choosing to be quiet could choose differently. I gave it another few minutes. Then I made the decision to move, slowly, quietly, no sudden movements. I clicked my headlamp back on, kept the camera running, and started picking my way back down toward the trail. Every step felt loud. Every branch that shifted in the wind felt like a response, but nothing responded. I made it to the trail, and I started moving toward the car. I made it back to the trail and started moving toward the logging road. Steady pace, not running, because running still felt wrong. I kept my headlamp on and my eyes forward, and I told myself that the hard part was over. It wasn't. About 3 minutes into the walk, I heard it. Something moving through the trees to my right, parallel to the trail, matching my pace exactly. Not ahead of me, not behind me, beside me. Every time I took a step, it took a step. Every time I slowed, it slowed. I couldn't see it. The tree line was too dark and too dense, and whatever was in there wasn't giving me anything to look at. Just sound. Just the steady, deliberate rhythm of something that was keeping pace with me through the forest, like it was escorting me out. I didn't stop. Stopping felt like an invitation, so I just kept moving, kept my eyes on the trail ahead, and tried to control my breathing. It stayed with me the entire way out, every step of it. And then, right at the point where the trees ended and the logging road began, it stopped, just like that. The sound cut off the moment the forest did. I took 3 more steps onto the gravel, turned around, and looked back at the tree line. I couldn't see anything, but I knew something was there. It had walked me all the way to the edge and then just watched me leave. I got to the car, unlocked it, and got in. I didn't linger. I pulled the door shut, locked it, and sat there for a moment with the engine off, just listening. The tree line was maybe 20 feet from where I'd parked. I couldn't see anything in it, couldn't hear anything either. I started the engine and pulled out onto the logging road, kept the headlights on high the whole way out. I didn't stop. Didn't look back, just drove until the logging road connected with the main road and kept going until I found a gas station with the lights still on. Pulled in, parked, and sat there for a few minutes before I felt like I could think straight. That was the first moment since before sunrise that I felt anything close to okay. And even then, okay is a strong word for it. I got home and sat down with the main camera footage that night. I wasn't ready to go through all of it. I just wanted to see what was actually on there. Whether the camera had caught what I thought it caught, or whether I'd been so rattled that my memory had filled in details that weren't real. It caught it, all of it. But that wasn't what stopped me cold. I was going through the early part of the recording before the figure stepped into the light, and I noticed something. In the footage, maybe 10 or 15 seconds before I raised the camera, the figure's head turns. Slightly, not dramatically, just a small rotation in my direction. I watched it 3 times to make sure I was seeing it right. And I was. It turned toward me before I raised the camera, before I made any movement at all, which means it wasn't reacting to me picking up the camera. It wasn't reacting to anything I did in that moment. It already knew exactly where I was. It had been tracking my position the whole time, and that small head turn was just the moment it stopped bothering to hide that fact. That detail didn't make it into my initial notes. I needed some time before I could think about what it actually meant. I went back 3 days later in daylight. I needed to see the area properly, and I needed to know if anything on the ground confirmed what I'd experienced. Large depressions in the soft soil upslope from where I'd been standing, deep, spaced far apart, wider than my boot by a significant margin. Further up, a wide area of flattened vegetation pressed down in multiple layers. Not weather damage, something large returning to the same spot repeatedly over time. And 30 yards east of that, a sapling snapped clean at roughly 9 feet off the ground. No storm explanation. Clean break, like it hadn't taken much effort at all. I stood in the middle of all of it, and the conclusion wasn't complicated. This wasn't somewhere something had passed through once. This was somewhere something lived. The layered bedding site was what got to me most. Fresh impressions in soil I could explain as recent activity, but compressed vegetation in multiple layers takes time. That spot had been used repeatedly over weeks at minimum, possibly much longer. Whatever I encountered up on that ridge hadn't wandered in from somewhere else that morning. It was home, and that means it was there before I arrived. It was there on the nights before Thursday. It was there when my trail camera was sitting on that tree, recording nothing but darkness, and then, apparently, something it hadn't been designed to catch clearly enough. It's still there now. That's the part that doesn't leave me. I drove home, I went back to my normal life, and whatever is living in that corridor kept doing exactly what it was doing before I showed up. I was the temporary one, I was the visitor. And the forest I've been treating as familiar territory my whole career. I'm not sure I know it as well as I thought I did. I didn't get to the GoPro footage until about a week later. I'd been putting it off. It had been facing backward the entire session. Everything behind me that I couldn't see while I was focused on the figure in front. The audio from when the second presence appeared is clear. Something large, circling, close. You can hear the direction shifting. You can hear it stop and start again. The walk back was what got me. I knew something had been pacing me through the trees. What I didn't know was how close. The GoPro puts it maybe 15, 20 feet into the tree line the entire way out, right there the whole time. And then, at the exact point where the forest meets the logging road, it stops. You can hear the gravel under my boots start and the forest go completely silent at the same moment. It walked me all the way to the edge, and the GoPro caught every step of it. I pulled the trail camera footage last. I almost didn't want to. It had triggered 11 times between midnight and 3:45 a.m., 15 minutes before I even parked. Something large had been moving through that corridor for hours before I arrived. By the time I walked in with my headlamp and my gear, whatever was up on that ridge had already been there most of the night. It wasn't passing through, it was already in position. I was the one who walked into it. When I put it all together, the trail camera timing, the figure on the trail, the second presence behind me, the GoPro audio, the unhurried exit, a pattern shows up that I can't dismiss. The trail camera shows it was already positioned up there before I arrived. The silence drop wasn't just a predator cue. It was the point where whatever was up there knew I was close enough. The figure came into view and held my attention forward while something else moved in behind me. The only trail out was blocked. And when they left on their own terms, at their own pace, with no urgency whatsoever. That's not random animal behavior. Every piece of it was coordinated. And the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I couldn't explain away no matter how hard I tried, is that it worked. I was completely controlled in that situation from the moment I walked in. I just didn't know it until it was already over. Right after the figure disappeared, before the forest sounds came back, I heard something. Low, resonant, felt in the chest more than heard with the ears. 2 seconds, then gone. I went back through the GoPro audio. It's there. I don't know what it means. I just know it's there on 2 separate records, and I'm done leaving it out. At the 12-second mark, the figure shifts its weight slightly, and the camera catches the musculature through the upper back and shoulders in a way that ends every costume argument. I've looked. A lot of people have looked. Nobody's found an explanation that holds up. I pulled the clearest frame from that moment and ran basic processing on it. What came back was a face, looking directly into the lens. That is the clearest Bigfoot sighting of June 2026. And the footage, there's no other word for it. It's mind-blowing, even to me. And I was there. The thermal feed on the handheld screen glows green and white in the pre-dawn shadow of the hemlock, and I am 400 meters from whatever is gathered beneath that rock overhang, and my hands are not shaking yet. That matters. In 12 years of field tracking, 4 of them in uniform, 8 of them hauling gear through roadless backcountry for a nonprofit that most people have never heard of, I have learned that steady hands mean a good shot, and right now, the drone needs a good shot. Then the thermal resolves, and I stop whispering numbers entirely, because there are 3 heat signatures beneath that overhang, and none of them are bears. Bears read differently, rounder, lower to the ground, the heat signature spreading from a wide torso close to the earth. These signatures are tall, vertical. The largest one stands well over 6 feet in the thermal image, and the shoulders are enormous, broad in a way that reads almost architectural on the green-white feed. And it is moving with a rolling, weight-forward gait that I have studied in every piece of footage ever gathered by my organization, and a dozen others. 2 are massive. The larger one easily 7 feet from crown to sole by my estimation. Shoulders like the hood of a truck, knuckle walking in slow, deliberate arcs through the leaf litter. The smaller of the 2 adults grooms, the back of the larger one with fingers that move with unmistakable, methodical precision. Between them, pressed against the rock face, a juvenile shifts and fidgets, leaning into the adult female's side and then pushing away again, that restless motion of something young and full of energy that has been made to stay still. I zoom the optical feed. The image is sharper than anything I have ever captured, sharper than anything my organization has ever captured, sharper than almost anything in the public record. Bigfoot in triplicate, going about the unhurried business of being alive on a June morning in the Appalachians. The larger male Bigfoot drops to all fours and moves to a pine tree maybe 20 feet from the overhang and drags its back against the bark in long, slow strokes, head lolling back with what I can only interpret as satisfaction. And I am whispering into the chest camera that I found them. I found them. I cannot believe I found them, and my voice is cracking slightly on the last word. And then the male Bigfoot stops. If the male stopped because he heard the drone, then what else has he heard? Like the whisper of a human heart 400 yards away. Every muscle in that enormous body goes rigid all at once, the way a deer freezes, except that a deer looks uncertain, and Bigfoot does not look uncertain at all. The head turns, not randomly, not scanning the canopy, but directly, precisely, toward the drone's infrared laser dot, as though Bigfoot has been aware of the laser for some time and has simply decided now is the moment to acknowledge it. Bigfoot stares. It does not blink. It does not move for 3 full seconds. And then it bends, picks up a fist-sized rock from the ground, and I punch the ascent command. The drone is too slow. The rock hits the body with a crack that comes through the controller's tiny speaker, and the feed spirals. Leaves, sky, a strobing smear of forest canopy, then the hard white flash of impact, and black. Time code 418. My own voice comes through the chest camera audio, 2 words back to back. Oh God. Oh no. I am already moving before the controller screen goes dark. I grab the pack, leave the controller in the leaves, and start running downhill, because downhill is the only direction that makes sense when something that large is upslope and knows exactly where you are. The chest camera swings and jolts against my sternum. I say it out loud, to no one, to myself, to whatever part of me still needs to narrate in order to function. The Bigfoot know where I am, and I have to run. If Bigfoot was aware of the laser dot for some time before reacting, does that mean it was already tracking the drone's operator and simply waiting? The hardwood forest on this slope is old, growth in patches, root systems heaving the ground into a maze of humps and depressions, the canopy so thick that the morning light hits the floor in scattered coins. I have run terrain like this before. I have never run it like this, heart already pounding past 150, one eye tracking the ground for ankle breakers, the other checking the upper slope for motion. At roughly 5.5 minutes in, I hear it, not footsteps, not the heavy crash I expected, but something worse. The quiet, saplings going silent as something moves through them, a gap in the ambient bird song. Then, 20 meters upslope, a 4-inch sapling snaps clean in half at chest height. No wind. Bigfoot is not running. Bigfoot is bounding, long ground-eating strides, and it is barely making noise doing it. I hit the screen without warning. The slope transitions from root-laced soil to loose shale that shifts underfoot like a living thing, and my boots go out from under me before I can check my speed. I fall hard onto my left side and slide. The chest camera records maybe 20 feet of gray blur, rock edge catching my elbow and stripping it raw through the sleeve before I fetch up against a boulder at the bottom of the screen with enough force to rattle my back teeth. I lie there for exactly 1 second. Then I look up. Bigfoot stands at the top of the scree field, motionless against the skyline, arms hanging, chest barely moving, not winded, not even close to winded. Bigfoot watches me with an expression I cannot name, not hunger, not rage, something more patient and more terrible than either. Then Bigfoot bends and picks up a rock the size of a basketball, and with what I can only describe as a casual, underhand bowl, sends it down the slope. The rock bounces once, twice, each impact multiplying its speed, and I throw myself sideways off the boulder just as it hits. The impact blasts chips of shale into my back and neck. I do not wait to see if Bigfoot reaches for another one. I drop into the ravine below the scree in a controlled slide that is barely controlled at all, landing feet first in a seasonal creek that drives the cold straight through my boots. The shock is immediate and total, the kind of cold that makes your lungs lock for a half second before they remember their job. I start wading downstream. The ravine walls close in around me, limestone and moss dripping with seep water. The creek may be 8 inches deep over flat rock. I am hoping the water kills my scent trail. I am hoping that enough. Then behind me, upstream, there is a splash. Not a small splash. Bigfoot has entered the creek. If water washes away scent, but Bigfoot can still see you waiting, how far can you run on cold-numbed feet before the splash becomes a grab? I do not look back. I can hear it. The rhythm of the waiting, unhurried, thigh-deep by the sound of the displacement, closing at a pace that is slower than my run, but faster than my wade. The ravine walls offer no purchase, no ledges, no exits. I run the water as fast as I can manage over slick submerged rock, arms out for balance, the cold working up from my feet into my calves and doing the kind of damage to muscle response that I know from cold weather training will start to matter if I am in this water for more than another few minutes. At 11 minutes, I see it. A fallen tree bridging the creek wall to wall, mossy and half-rotted, the trunk maybe 14 inches in diameter. I hit it at a crawl, scrambling up and forward on hands and knees, the chest camera recording the green-black surface of the wood inches from my face, the soft give of punky heartwood under my palms. I am halfway across when the log rolls. My left hand catches a branch stub. My body swings out over the water, feet dangling, the creek 3 feet below me. I look back. Bigfoot is 20 feet behind me in the creek, wading steady, water churning white around its thighs, eyes on me with that same unreadable patience. I pull. The shoulder that took the fall on the scree screams at me. I pull anyway, get a knee over the branch, drag myself horizontal, and run the last section of log on instinct alone, jumping to the far bank without breaking stride. The rhododendron thicket I crash into at 12 minutes is so dense the stems interlock at chest height. I have to drop low, almost to hands and knees, forcing myself through gaps in the tangle. Behind me, I hear Bigfoot hit the edge of the thicket and slow. The bulk that makes Bigfoot so fast in open terrain is a liability in vegetation this tight. I use every inch of that advantage. How long can you count on a thicket to slow something that can snap a 4-inch sapling at chest height? I know I am in trouble the moment the rhododendron thins. The chest camera picks up the clearing at 12:30. Rusted cables coiled in the leaf litter, a collapsed winch frame, a pile of rotting timber at the edge of a small opening that has the particular silence of a place left alone for 50 years. Old logging operation, probably 1970s by the hardware. The cables are the thick braided steel they used for skidder lines, and the winch frame is cast iron, built to last. Everything built to last has outlasted the people who used it. I take 3 steps into the clearing, heading for a stack of railroad ties against the far tree line, and the ground sounds wrong under my right boot. Not hollow, wrong. A muffled softness under one step that the step after doesn't have. The sound of soil that has bridged itself over empty space and is waiting for a reason to stop. At 13:15, Bigfoot crashes through the rhododendron behind me. I sprint. The snap I hear is not a branch. The ground opens up. 2 seconds of free fall. The chest camera records dirt walls, root ends jutting from the sides like broken fingers, a circle of daylight shrinking above me into a pale coin. And then I hit mud and standing water, maybe 4 inches of it, with a force that buckles my knees and sends me onto my side in a full body slam against the pit floor. Prospect pit, hand dug, maybe 10 feet deep. Old-time miners dig, the walls crumbly and steep, no ladder, no footholds that will hold body weight. I try the nearest wall immediately, clawing at it with both hands, and a sheet of dirt the size of a welcome mat peels away and drops on me. I try the opposite side. Same result. I work my way around the entire perimeter, testing every section, and every section gives me the same answer. The soil is too saturated, too old, too eager to fall. At 14 minutes, Bigfoot appears at the rim of the pit above me. Bigfoot peers down with that enormous dark face, head tilted slightly, and then, with a deliberateness that is somehow more frightening than anger, sits down on the edge, legs dangling over the drop, and waits. It settles its forearms on its knees like a man sitting on a dock. It is not in a hurry. It knows exactly what I know. I am not getting out of this hole on my own. I try both walls again over the next several minutes, systematically, testing every square foot for anything that will hold. Every attempt fails. The walls are old and saturated, and they simply give way. My left hand closes on something metal in the muck at the base of the wall. A rusted hand drill, abandoned here by whatever miner dug this pit and never came back. Maybe 2.5 feet long, not enough to reach the surface. I hold it anyway. Bigfoot watches me with what I can only describe as mild interest, occasionally tilting its head as I move around the pit floor. What use is a 2-foot rusted hand drill against a creature that can throw a basketball-sized rock with underhand casualness? Then at 18:30, the juvenile Bigfoot arrives. 2 smaller sets of feet appear at the rim beside the larger ones, and the juvenile makes a sound, a rapid clicking, 3 pulses, then a 4th. And the male Bigfoot responds with a sound from low in its chest, a rumble that I feel in the mud through my boots more than I hear with my ears. They are communicating about me. About what to do with me? I am 10 feet underground, being deliberated over by a Bigfoot family, and the thought hits me with a clarity that bypasses panic entirely. I need to make myself impossible to wait out. The emergency space blanket comes out of the pack in a crinkle of metallicized mylar that sounds obscenely loud in the confined space. I tie one end to the rusted hand drill with my bootlace, making a flag, and then I snap the blanket open and wave it. The reflection hits the pit walls, bounces off the mud, and throws fractured silver light upward. Bigfoot flinches back from the rim, not far, but back. The juvenile Bigfoot makes a hissing sound. I wave harder, screaming, not words, just raw volume sent straight up out of my chest, every decibel I have. I throw my water bottle at the face I can see at the rim. It misses. It doesn't matter. The distraction is enough. Bigfoot stands up from its crouch, taking a step back from the edge, uncertain for the first time since the drone fell. The root is on the far side of the pit, thick as my forearm, ancient, running from deep in the wall, up through the soil, and into the surface. I cannot believe I missed it. I scramble across, grab it with both hands, and pull my full body weight on it. It holds. I climb, hand over hand, the chest camera tilted upward, showing nothing but mud and my own straining forearms, and I roll over the rim onto open ground, just as Bigfoot turns back toward the pit's edge. If you're out of the pit, but Bigfoot is turning back toward the edge, does it already know you're behind it, or is it checking to see where you went? I am out. I am on my feet, and Bigfoot is standing 10 meters away, directly between me and every direction that leads toward the trail. I go upslope. Not because it makes tactical sense. Upslope is harder. My legs are already burning. The ankle that took the rough landing in the ravine is sending warnings up my shin with every step. But because the juvenile Bigfoot are somewhere in the rhododendron, and I am not walking back into that. I sprint for the ridgeline with everything I have left, and behind me, Bigfoot roars. Not the chase cry I heard on the scree slope. This is something more structured, something directed, a sound with information in it, and the juvenile Bigfoot answer it from 2 different positions, left and right, flanking, using the terrain between the trees to cut off the angles. Bigfoot is coordinating. Bigfoot is running a drive, the way wolves run drives, the way predators that hunt in families run drives, and the juvenile Bigfoot are the wings, and the male Bigfoot is the hammer, and I am the thing being pushed toward whatever the hammer is aimed at. The ridge line breaks into open air at 21 minutes, the forest thinning as the soil thins over bare rock, wind coming in hard from the west, and I see the fire tower about 300 meters ahead, a rusted steel lattice structure, 4 legs splayed wide at the base, a cab the size of a garden shed perched 60 feet above the ridge. 1950s Forest Service construction. I have seen these all over Appalachia, all of them decommissioned, most of them deteriorating. Right now, it is the only vertical structure in my line of sight, and vertical is the only advantage I have left against something faster than me on flat ground. I reach the base at 22:15. The wooden stairs are nailed to one leg of the lattice, several boards missing or collapsed, the railing a suggestion rather than a reality. I climb fast, testing each step with the ball of my foot before committing, skipping 2 boards that flex dangerously under the first ounce of weight, the chest camera bouncing with each step and recording the rusted railing, the wind that has picked up along the ridge, the forest floor falling away below me at a rate that I find unexpectedly comforting. Distance from the ground is distance from Bigfoot. At the cab, I hit the steel door with my shoulder, and it opens with a shriek of rust on rust, every crow and jay on the ridge erupting into alarm calls at the sound. I get inside and slam the latch down. A simple drop bar mechanism, old but still functional. Bigfoot reaches the base of the tower at 24 minutes. I watch through a shattered window frame as Bigfoot stops at the base, looks up at me with those dark eyes, and then, without hesitation, without testing the stairs, puts both hands on the steel lattice legs and shakes. The tower moves, not a tremble, a full sickening sway, maybe 8 inches of arc at the top, and I grab the nearest support beam hard enough to feel the rust cut my palm through my glove. The cab groans. A piece of old window glass drops from the frame, and I watch it fall 60 feet and shatter on the rock below. If 8 inches of sway at 60 feet is terrifying, what happens when Bigfoot finds the resonant frequency of the tower and the sway becomes 2 feet? Bigfoot shakes the tower again. Then Bigfoot begins to climb, not the stairs. The outside of the lattice, hand over hand, Bigfoot's weight pulling the steel into new shapes as it ascends, the whole structure groaning with each grip change. It moves with a terrible efficiency. No wasted motion, no uncertainty, angled steel that would tax a trained climber, barely slowing Bigfoot at all. I can feel it in the floor of the cab, each handhold transmitting vibration upward through 60 feet of steel. I go to the secondary door on the opposite side of the cab. It is rusted shut. I kick it once, twice, 3 times, and on the third kick it swings open on seized hinges with a sound like a rifle shot. Below me, 60 feet of open air to the forest floor. To my left, running diagonally from a bracket on the cab wall down to a pulley system at the base of the tower leg, an old supply cable, frayed, galvanized steel, stiff with age. I grab it with both hands and pull. It moves. I wrap it twice around my belt hardware and once around my right thigh over the pants, tighten my grip, and step off the edge. The descent is not a controlled rappel. It is a controlled fall that is barely controlling itself. The cable singing under tension, the pulleys below jumping and squealing, my gloves heating from friction in the first 2 seconds. I slam into the lattice once with my shoulder and once with my hip, the second impact spinning me outward, so I hit the next section of frame face first with my forearm. At roughly 15 feet above the ground, the cable reaches the limit of the pulley's travel and jerks hard, and I swing in and land feet first on a narrow maintenance catwalk, both ankles taking the impact, and grab the railing before my momentum carries me over the edge. The cable goes slack above me, fraying from the sudden load, and then it snaps. I drop to the railing with both arms, legs dangling, and then I drop the remaining distance to the ground and roll. I look up. Bigfoot is in the cab, looking down through the gap where the secondary door was. For 1 second, we are looking directly at each other through 60 feet of September-colored air. Then, I am in the brush, moving, and above me I hear the crash and shriek of twisted metal as Bigfoot drops from the cab to the catwalk and the catwalk gives way under the weight. I am bleeding from a cut above my left eye. I do not know when it happened, and I am disoriented, moving through the forest on terrain that has stopped being familiar. At 29 minutes, I recognize a double-trunk oak, the kind of landmark I logged during the pre-mission survey, and my stomach drops. I am circling back toward the drone crash site. Wrong direction, and the juvenile Bigfoot appeared on both sides of me, through the trees, moving parallel, neither of them closing, but both of them nudging my path, steering me. They are not attacking, they are herding. If the juveniles are herding you back toward the drone crash site, does the male Bigfoot already be waiting there? Or is the drone itself the thing they want you to lead them to? The gorge takes me by surprise, even though I am looking for hazards. The forest simply ends at a cliff edge, and I drop 4 feet to a stream bed, and the walls are suddenly 50 feet above me and 15 feet apart. Limestone that has been cutting itself deeper into this ridge for 10,000 years. The walls so close that I can touch both of them simultaneously if I stretch my arms. The floor is a strip of shallow water over flat rock, the stream running clear and cold, the walls above me dripping with seep water. I can hear Bigfoot entering the gorge behind me almost immediately, the shoulders almost brushing both walls simultaneously, that same deliberate pace, moving through the confined space the way it moved through the open forest, like it owns whatever it is currently inside. The juvenile Bigfoot are above me on the gorge rim, clicking to each other and to the male Bigfoot below. I am scanning the walls as I run. At 32.5 minutes, I see it. A wedge of limestone, maybe 2 feet across, jammed tight between 2 sections of the gorge wall at a height of about 25 feet, holding back what looks like a talus slope of accumulated debris behind it. Decades of rockfall that has been waiting for the keystone to give way. The ledge below it is reachable, barely. I climb fast and badly, hands and boots on limestone that cuts both. The chest camera records the rock face 6 inches from my face and my own ragged breathing. I reach the ledge and get my hands on the keystone and push. It doesn't move. I brace my back against the gorge wall and push with both legs. Nothing. Bigfoot is 40 feet below me and climbing the gorge wall with an ease that makes my chest ache to watch. I pull the flare, gun, One shot, one flare, the barrel jammed into the gap behind the keystone as deep as it will go. I fire. The confined space turns the detonation into something enormous. Light and pressure ricocheting off limestone walls, the gorge acting as an amplifier for the concussion. My ears ring, white smoke, and the keystone shifts. If the keystone shifts, but doesn't fall, and Bigfoot is still climbing, did you just announce your position with a muzzle flash visible from orbit for nothing? I pull myself sideways and press into a crevice in the wall as the slope gives way above me. The sound is extraordinary, not a crash but a continuous rolling thunder, limestone on limestone, 50 years of accumulated talus cascading down the gorge in a wave that raises a curtain of white dust so thick the chest camera goes opaque for several seconds before the air begins to clear. When it does, the gorge is blocked floor to ceiling in fresh debris for a span of maybe 30 feet, and on the far side of that debris, Bigfoot is buried to the waist and roaring, not pain exactly, but a fury so massive it shakes the dust from the gorge walls. The juvenile Bigfoot are on my side of the blockage, small enough to pick their way up and over. I can hear them behind me as I climb the debris pile, cutting my hands open on fresh, broken rock and drop to the other side. Bigfoot is already pulling itself free from the debris as I exit the gorge into open forest. It is moving slower, not injured, I think, but slowed. 2 minutes maybe less. I start running, and my left ankle fails completely, sending me down onto my hands and one knee in the leaf litter, and for a moment I lie on the ground with my face in last autumn's leaves and listen to the gorge behind me and breathe. I drag myself to the hollow log at 38 minutes. I know exactly where I am now. The drone wreck is nearby, and the hollow log has been here since before I arrived. A red oak trunk, maybe 4 feet in diameter, collapsed and tunneled out by decades of decay. The heartwood soft as wet cardboard at the entrance where I push my pack in ahead of me. I find the drone in the ferns a few yards out. The body cracked, one rotor arm bent back on itself, and I pull the memory card from the housing before I crawl inside the log. The chest camera records the dim interior, the smell of wet rot and fungus, and the faint sweetness of decomposing tannin. My own blood on the bark where I drag myself forward with both arms. I wedge against the interior curve and go completely still. If a hollow log hides you from sight but not from scent, and Bigfoot has already found you once by tracking your laser, how long before that patient, unreadable patience runs out and the log becomes a coffin? From 40 minutes onward, I wait in the dark and rot. The forest sounds come back in layers. First, the insects, the continuous low-register hum of a June morning that means nothing is disturbing the canopy. Then a woodpecker somewhere above, working a dead snag in short, measured bursts. Then a chickadee in the understory, close enough that I could hear it if I breathed wrong. The sounds of a forest that has decided the emergency is over. I watch the light through the bark gaps and I wait. Bigfoot emerges from the direction of the gorge. I hear it before I see it. Not the full stride I heard on the ridge, not the bounding gait from the scree slope, but a slightly uneven cadence that carries the faintest asymmetry, one footfall marginally heavier than the other. The rockfall exacted something after all. Then the feet come into the gap in the bark, enormous, calloused, the toes spreading with each placement on the ground, each toe as wide as 2 of mine, the skin on the sole thickened to something that looks almost like the bark I am hiding inside. Bigfoot tracks slowly across my field of view, and then Bigfoot stops, sniffs. The sound of that inhalation is deep and deliberate, not a casual check, but a full assessment, the kind of scenting behavior I have documented in field notes and never experienced from this end. I press my hand over my mouth and nose and breathe through my fingers in the smallest possible volumes, watching through the gap as those feet stand motionless inches from the opening of the log. I can smell Bigfoot, wet fur and old blood, and something underneath that is almost vegetable, pine resin and leaf rot, and the deeper smell of something that has always been part of this forest and was part of it long before anything calling itself human walked through here. The feet do not move. Then from deep in Bigfoot's chest comes a sound that is not a growl and not a vocalization I have any word for. A low, cycling hum, almost subsonic, felt more than heard. The juvenile Bigfoot answered from somewhere in the ferns to my north. The hum again. Another answer. The feet shift once. I stop breathing entirely, and then they turn and begin to move away. The cadence fades. The forest fills the space with ordinary sound. I lie in the hollow log for another full minute before I trust it, and then I let my breath out against the bark and the chest camera records my face, streaked and filthy, and the words I mouth in the silence of the log without quite making them into sound. I crawl out. I sit in the ferns beside the ruined drone with the memory card in my hand, and the morning light coming through the canopy at the low angle it makes in June when the day is just deciding what it's going to be. Later, when I reviewed the stabilized and enhanced reconstruction of the drone's final 3 seconds, the footage I nearly died for twice over, what I see in that last frame is not what I expected to see. The male Bigfoot, looking up at the falling drone, is not snarling. Its left arm is curved around the juvenile Bigfoot, pulling that smaller body in against its side. Its right hand is raised not for another throw, but palm outward, angled to block the camera light from the juvenile's face, protecting it from the brightness. That is the last frame. That is the clearest footage of Bigfoot in the Appalachian Mountains, June 2026. They are not monsters. They are a family moving through old mountains on a Tuesday morning in June, and I was the thing that came out of the sky uninvited, and Bigfoot handled the situation with a restraint that, if I'm being honest with myself, I am not certain I would have managed in return. I was seconds away from being mauled by a moose until Bigfoot came crashing out of the trees and stopped it. What the Sasquatch did to the moose next is the most brutal Bigfoot encounter captured on camera to date. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I got trapped in the worst scenario of my life. At the time, I spent most of my weekends exploring places most people never bother with. Nothing extreme. I wasn't the kind of hiker who needed to summit anything or post about it afterward. I just liked getting away from crowds and following old routes that didn't see much traffic anymore. That morning was supposed to be one of those trips. I had a backpack, a decent amount of supplies, and an old folded map I'd been using to navigate the area. I'd scouted the route beforehand and felt good about it. The trail was quiet. I was moving at a comfortable pace and feeling the kind of relaxed that only comes from being somewhere genuinely remote. Then the feeling started, just this persistent, uncomfortable sense that somebody was paying attention to me even though I knew I was alone. Every 100 yards or so, I'd feel an almost physical pull to look over my shoulder. I tried to ignore it at first. I'd hiked alone in remote places for years and never felt anything like it, but the feeling kept coming back. After the third or fourth time I stopped to look behind me, I started wondering if something was really there. Every time, the trail was empty, just trees and a bend in the path. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I told myself it was all in my head and kept hiking. About 20 minutes later, I rounded a bend and found a moose standing in the middle of the trail. It was huge. I stopped and gave it space, expecting it to wander off. It didn't. It just stood there watching me. Every so often, though, its attention would drift past me, back down the trail. Its ears would swivel in that direction, and its posture would tighten. I kept looking behind me. There was never anything there. Then the moose suddenly stomped the ground. I started backing away. Instead of calming down, it grew more agitated. It took a few uneasy steps forward, lowered its head, and fixed its eyes on me. I ran. The trail was rough, but I pushed as fast as I could. I expected the moose to give up after a short chase. It didn't. I could hear it crashing through the brush behind me the entire time. Then, somehow, it got ahead of me. When I came over a rise, it was standing in the trail again, blocking my path. This time it looked different. Exhausted, yes, but also scared. Its eyes kept flicking toward the trees to one side. Its ears twitched constantly, as if it was listening for something. I followed its gaze. The forest was silent. Then a single heavy footstep came from the tree line. The moose went rigid. Everything about it changed in an instant. The set of its shoulders, the angle of its head, the way its weight shifted onto its feet. And in that moment, looking at an animal that had been terrorizing me for the past half hour, I had a genuinely strange thought. Whatever just made that sound scared it more than I did. The moose locked its eyes back onto me and charged. I had nowhere to go. I braced myself because there was genuinely nothing else left to do. The distance between us was disappearing faster than I could process it. Then the forest exploded. Something came out of the trees to my left, so fast I didn't have time to track it. One instant, I was watching the moose close the final distance, and the next, something massive slammed into it from the side. The impact made a sound I felt in my sternum, a deep physical collision that sent both of them crashing through a stand of young birch like it wasn't there. Branches snapped, something hit the ground hard enough to shake the soil. The whole thing happened in under 2 seconds and left me standing there trying to understand what I'd just witnessed. For a moment, neither of them came back into view. All I could hear was movement, branches breaking, brush thrashing, the sound of 2 enormous bodies crashing through the woods somewhere beyond the trees. Every impact seemed to come from a different direction, making it impossible to tell where either of them actually was. Then I heard the moose, not the aggressive snorting I'd heard before. This was louder, sharper, a raw, panicked sound that echoed through the forest and cut off abruptly. It was the first time since I'd encountered the animal that it sounded like something was happening to it instead of the other way around. A dark shape crossed between the trees maybe 30 yards away. It moved too high off the ground. I only caught a glimpse before it vanished again, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. It was Bigfoot. The crashing started moving deeper into the woods, then suddenly swung back toward me. Trees shook. A cluster of saplings bent sideways and snapped. That's when I stopped trying to figure out what I was looking at and started thinking about how fast I could get away from it. I backed away fast, stumbled over a root, caught myself, and put as much space between myself and the collision point as I could manage. I wasn't trying to watch. I was trying to survive. But the sounds kept pulling my attention back. Bigfoot was upright, completely, fully upright, not rearing up briefly the way a bear does, before dropping back to all fours, but standing and moving entirely on 2 legs. It was enormous, broader across the shoulders than anything I'd ever seen, with arms that seemed longer than they should have been. Dark hair covered most of its body. In the irregular light coming through the canopy, it was hard to hold the image steady in my mind, because my brain kept trying to map it onto something familiar and kept failing. The moose didn't flee. I need to emphasize that, because it was the part that made the least sense. After everything it had done to me, after all of that aggression and a full charge, it came right back. I heard the second collision before I saw it. Another enormous impact, more crashing, the sound of something being pushed backward through brush. The moose had recovered and engaged again. I found a position behind a large tree and watched. They collided again. Bigfoot took the hit, absorbed it, and drove back. The moose was strong. I already knew that from experience, but whatever it was throwing at this thing, the thing wasn't giving any ground. It moved with a level of balance and coordination that had no business existing in something that large. When it sidestepped, it was deliberate and controlled. When it drove forward, it used its whole body. I watched a section of trees bend and snap as they struggled through it. At one point, a crack rang out through the woods that I initially thought was a gunshot before I realized it was a tree. A real tree, not a sapling, being pushed off its base. Bigfoot grabbed the moose by the shoulder and wrenched it sideways. The moose stumbled, recovered, and came back. What struck me was the timing. Every time the moose committed to a charge, Bigfoot seemed to know exactly where it was going to be a second before it got there. It wasn't meeting force with force. It was waiting for the animal to overextend itself, then using all that momentum against it. At one point, the moose lunged through a narrow gap between 2 trees. Bigfoot shifted at the last possible moment. The moose missed completely and slammed shoulder first into a trunk thick enough that I couldn't have wrapped my arms around it. The impact echoed through the woods. Before the moose could fully recover its footing, Bigfoot was already moving again. What got to me was that the moose didn't quit. After everything, the chase, the circling, the exhaustion I could see in its labored movements, it kept re-engaging. Whether that was instinct or stubbornness, I couldn't say, but there was something almost terrible about watching an animal that size refuse to accept what was happening to it. Every time I thought the fight was winding down, the moose would lower its head and come back, and the whole thing would erupt again. They disappeared into a thicker section of woods, and I lost sight of them entirely, tracking the fight only by sound. Impacts, crashes, the thrashing of brush, heavy breathing I could hear even from where I was standing. The canopy shook in a section of trees, maybe 40 yards off, as something large got pushed into the upper branches. Then they came crashing back into a more open patch, and I could see them again, both of them moving slower now, the fight taking its toll. Bigfoot's technique, if you could call it that, was to absorb whatever the moose gave it and immediately use the momentum against the animal. The moose would charge, Bigfoot would redirect it, and in the fraction of a second, while the moose was recovering its footing, Bigfoot would drive into it. It happened over and over, the same pattern, each time leaving the moose slightly less able to recover than the time before. I watched it grab the moose's neck with both hands and hold on. The moose thrashed, kicked, and drove its weight sideways. Bigfoot didn't let go. They spun through a patch of open ground, crushing the undergrowth flat before Bigfoot drove the moose into a tree trunk with a sound that carried through the entire forest. The moose went down onto its front knees. It got back up. It always got back up, but every time it did, something was different, slower, less certain. The confidence it had carried all day, the absolute territorial authority of a 1,200-pound animal that had never seriously been challenged, was draining out of it in real time, and what was replacing it was something I hadn't expected. A low sound from the moose I hadn't heard once during the entire chase. Not aggression, not the sound of an animal asserting itself. The moose sounded afraid. I forced myself to move. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to put distance between myself and whatever was happening in those trees. The fight was still going. Every time I thought it might be winding down, another crash would erupt, sometimes close, sometimes farther off, once so close to my left that I ducked and pressed myself against a tree without thinking. The sounds of the fight shifted in and out as I moved. Sometimes it felt like they were moving away from me. Then it would swing back in my direction, and I'd feel that full-body alertness again, every sense turned up as far as it would go. I couldn't shake the awareness of what I'd seen, the ease with which that creature had absorbed a full charge from a moose that had nearly run me down. If it decided to redirect that toward me, I had no answer for it. I almost got caught in it once. The sounds had drifted farther away, and I started to think I was finally putting distance between myself and whatever was happening behind me. Then a crash erupted somewhere off to my right, much closer than it should have been. I barely had time to react. Something huge tore through the trees ahead of me. Saplings folded over. Branches exploded outward. I threw myself behind a fallen log just as the moose burst into view, moving at full speed. It crossed the trail less than 20 feet away and disappeared into the woods on the opposite side. Maybe 2 seconds later, Bigfoot crossed the same stretch of trail. I didn't get a clear look at it. I only caught a glimpse of something enormous moving through the trees at a speed that didn't seem possible. Then both of them were gone again, and another collision echoed somewhere deeper in the forest. I stayed on the ground for a while after that. My legs were shaking, and I wasn't in any hurry to test whether they still worked. Eventually, I got back to my feet and kept moving. I didn't really have another choice. A few times, I heard movement somewhere off to the side, not behind me, not ahead, but running parallel to my path, keeping pace. It was far enough off that I couldn't see anything through the trees, but close enough that I couldn't write it off as random animal noise either. Something was moving with us. I told myself it was a deer, or maybe another moose spooked by the first one. I didn't believe it, but I needed a reason to keep moving instead of freezing up entirely. The saplings along the trail were damaged, not from the moose. The brakes were too high up, and some of them had been pushed in directions that didn't match a large animal moving at ground level. I saw disturbed ground in patches where the underbrush had been flattened in ways I couldn't explain, and then I started seeing tracks. Not moose tracks. I'm not a trained tracker by any stretch, but I've spent enough time in the backcountry to recognize when a print doesn't match what I expect to find. These were large, unusually large, and the shape was wrong for anything I could easily name. I didn't stop to study them. I kept running. At one point, I climbed onto a fallen log to get a better sense of where the sounds were coming from. I immediately regretted it. Through a gap in the trees, I caught another glimpse of them. The moose wasn't charging anymore. It was backing away in short, uncertain steps, its head swinging from side to side as if it couldn't decide where the danger was coming from. The creature kept advancing, not quickly, not aggressively, just steadily. Then the moose lunged again, and both of them disappeared behind the trees. A second later, another crash rolled through the forest, and I climbed down from the log and kept moving. I kept moving, but the fight kept finding me. The sounds would fade for a stretch, and I'd start to breathe again. And then another impact would erupt somewhere in the trees, close enough that I could feel it. And I'd realize they were still at it, still circling, still crashing through the same stretch of forest I was trying to escape. The sounds were supposed to be getting farther away. That was what I kept telling myself as I moved, that the crashing behind me was fading, that the fight was pulling in a different direction, that every step I took was putting more distance between me and whatever was still happening back there in the trees. For maybe 10 minutes, I almost believed it. The impacts grew less frequent. The gaps between them stretched out. I started to think I was finally getting clear. Then something slammed into something else off to my right, close enough that I felt it before I heard it, and I realized the sounds hadn't been fading at all. They'd been moving, shifting position in a way that had nothing to do with me, or maybe had everything to do with me. I couldn't tell. I just knew that what I'd mistaken for distance was really direction, and now the direction had changed. I adjusted my route, angling left toward what looked like a clearer path through the trees. 20 yards in, something crashed through the brush ahead of me, and I stopped. Not close, but close enough. I tried another way. Same result. The sounds kept showing up where I was headed before I got there, as if the forest was rearranging itself one step ahead of me. I don't know how long I stood there weighing my options before I finally accepted what was actually happening. The fight wasn't behind me anymore. It wasn't ahead of me. It was all around me, still going, and somehow I was right in the middle of it. A sudden eruption of sound tore through the trees to my left. There was no warning, no buildup. 1 second, things were relatively quiet, and the next, something large slammed into something else, hard enough to shake the forest around me. I'd been moving carefully, watching where I put my feet, and then the world to my left just came apart. I dropped immediately. The ground came up fast. I hit on my forearms and stayed there, face down in the dirt and dead leaves, because every instinct I had was telling me the same thing. Stay low. The crashing was getting closer, not directly toward me, but close enough that it didn't matter. Whatever path they were taking had shifted, and there was only a short stretch of open ground between me and whatever was tearing through those trees. They crossed maybe 10 yards to my right. I felt the impacts through the ground before I got a clear look at them. Heavy thuds rolled through the soil, one after another, and then 2 enormous shapes burst through a gap in the trees at a speed that didn't make sense for something that large. Branches snapped apart. Pieces of bark and wood flew through the air. Something heavy hit the ground, bounced once, and disappeared into the brush. Dirt and splinters rained across my back and shoulders. I pressed myself flat and didn't move. The whole thing lasted maybe a few seconds. Then they were gone, crashing into the trees on the other side and carrying the fight with them. The sound started to fade again, shifting farther away through the forest. I stayed where I was for a while after that, trying to slow my breathing and make sense of what I'd just seen. I got back on my feet and kept moving. My hands were still shaking, and my thoughts felt a little scrambled, but the trail was still there, and I still knew roughly where I was going. At that point, that was enough. I'd covered maybe 100 yards when a moose stepped out of the trees ahead of me. It wasn't charging, it just walked onto the trail about 40 feet away and stopped. For a second, neither of us moved. It stood there, breathing hard, its sides rising and falling so heavily that I could see it from where I was. One shoulder was dark with blood. Its head hung lower than it had earlier, and it looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with me. Then it looked up and saw me. The change was immediate. Its head came up. Its ears shifted forward. The exhaustion was still there, but now something else was too. I didn't know whether it actually recognized me or whether I was just another thing standing in its territory. Either way, I had seen that look before, and I didn't need any more information than that. Its weight shifted forward. I turned and ran. There wasn't any real decision involved. 1 second I was standing there, and the next I was moving as fast as I could down the trail. I heard the moose behind me almost immediately. It sounded heavier than before and not quite as fast, but it was still coming. Branches snapped. Hooves hammered against the ground. Every few seconds I expected to hear it right on top of me. Then something hit it. The sound came from behind and slightly to one side, sudden enough that I almost stumbled. The pursuit stopped instantly. In its place came the same crashing collision I'd been hearing all day, brush tearing apart, branches breaking, the heavy impact of 2 large bodies slamming into each other. I didn't stop to find out what had happened. I just kept running. By the time I finally slowed down, my lungs were burning, and the sounds of the fight had faded back into the forest behind me. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to catch my breath, then started moving again before anything else had a chance to find me. I slowed down once the sounds had faded far enough into the distance that I could think straight again. My breathing settled. The shaking in my hands eased a little. I pulled out the map and tried to figure out exactly where I was and how I was supposed to get out of there. As far as I could tell, I had 3 options. One route cut northeast through a thicker section of forest. Another followed the terrain downhill into a low corridor between two rises. The third climbed a slope before leveling out and eventually reconnecting with the trailhead route. Under normal circumstances, I would have taken the lower path without a second thought. The ground looked easier, the route was more direct, and I could see farther ahead, so I started toward it. I hadn't gone very far when the sound shifted again. I didn't see anything, but I heard a sudden burst of crashing somewhere ahead in that direction. Trees shook, branches snapped. Whatever was fighting had just moved into the exact route I was planning to take. Not close enough to see, but close enough that I stopped walking. I stood there for a few seconds, watching the tops of the trees sway and trying to convince myself I wasn't actually seeing the forest move. The lower route was out. I turned and headed toward the northeast path instead. That lasted maybe 2 minutes. Movement caught my eye ahead of me, and I froze. The moose came through the trees at a fast, uneven pace, cutting across the path from one side to the other. It wasn't charging anything. It wasn't being chased, at least not that I could tell. It just looked like an animal trying to get somewhere in a hurry. It never looked in my direction. A few seconds later, it disappeared back into the brush, and the sounds of it faded into the woods. I waited another minute before moving. That left the third option, the climb. I started up the slope, taking it slowly and trying to keep an eye on everything at once. I'd made it maybe 50 feet uphill when movement below caught my attention. Bigfoot crossed the trail beneath me. It happened so quickly that for a second I wasn't even sure I'd actually seen it. One moment the trail was empty. The next, a massive figure was moving across it and into the trees on the other side. It wasn't looking for me. It wasn't tracking me. If it knew I was there at all, it didn't care. It just kept moving, focused on something else entirely. Then it was gone. I stood there on the slope for a long moment, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. Every route I'd considered had been crossed by something. The lower path by the fight, the northeast route by the moose, the high route by Bigfoot. For the first time all day, I honestly had no idea where I was supposed to go next. I heard running water somewhere ahead and headed toward it. At that point, a creek seemed as good a route as any. I was halfway across when the fight crashed into the creek upstream. I dropped against the bank immediately. They crossed maybe 20 feet away. Water exploded upward. Rocks shifted and ground together under something heavy. The sounds echoed off the banks, louder. Then they'd been in the trees. I stayed still and waited. After a few seconds, the noise moved downstream and disappeared back into the forest. I stayed where I was until everything went quiet again, then finished crossing and kept moving. I had just climbed out of the creek when the moose showed up again. It stepped out of the brush about 30 feet away and stopped. It looked worse than before. One side was dark with blood, and I could hear it breathing from where I stood. It looked at me and took a step forward. Then Bigfoot appeared. 1 second it wasn't there. Next, it was standing between us. The moose's attention shifted immediately. I started backing away, slow and careful. I didn't want either of them remembering I was there. The ridge was the only option I had left. It was narrow, maybe 4 feet across at the tightest point, with the ground dropping away sharply on the right side and a rock face rising on the left. Not dangerous under normal circumstances, just a section that required attention. I was halfway across when the fight erupted below me on both sides almost simultaneously. Left side first, then right, like they'd come through the lower ground and split around the base of the ridge without either of them knowing or caring that I was directly above them. I stopped walking and sat down against the rock face. The vibration came up through the stone every time they collided. Not subtle. A deep physical pulse that I felt in my spine each time it happened. I couldn't see either of them from where I was sitting, just the trees moving below me on both sides, shaking in ways that had nothing to do with wind. I sat there and waited and tried not to think about what would happen if one of them decided to come up. I was almost across the ridge when I heard something behind me and turned to see the moose coming up the path. It was closer than I wanted it to be, and on that narrow stretch of ridge, I had nowhere to go. Before it could reach me, something slammed into it from below. The impact knocked the moose sideways off the ridge. A second later, I heard it crash into the trees below, followed immediately by Bigfoot. The fight started up again somewhere beneath me, and I didn't wait around to watch. I turned and crossed the rest of the ridge as fast as I could. I came down off the ridge and spotted them in a clearing ahead. The moose looked finished. It was still standing, but barely. Blood covered one side, and every movement seemed like an effort. It made one last push toward Bigfoot, more instinct than anything else. Bigfoot wasn't untouched either. There were wounds along its shoulder and side, dark against the fur, but it was still standing strong. Then it moved. The moose went down and didn't get back up. I stood there for a few seconds, looking at the two of them before deciding I'd seen enough. The outcome had been obvious long before the end. Bigfoot turned and found me standing at the edge of the clearing. It approached slowly. I didn't back away. My legs wouldn't have cooperated anyway. It stopped a few feet away and crouched down, reached to one side and placed something on the ground between us. A piece of the moose, clean cut, set down deliberately, oriented toward me. Then it stood back up and didn't move. I looked at the offering and then at Bigfoot, and I couldn't find a single framework that made sense of what I was seeing. Animals don't do this. Nothing I knew did this. I stood there trying to locate an explanation and kept coming up empty. 2 rifle shots came through the trees, flat and clean, maybe a quarter-mile off. A hunter somewhere in the last of the light, lining up on something that had nothing to do with any of this. He never knew what was nearby. Probably went home with a straightforward story. Bigfoot turned toward the sound immediately. I started moving before I really thought about it. I pushed through the trees, found the trail, and kept going. I heard something behind me in the clearing, but I didn't turn around to see what it was. I didn't stop until I reached the truck. I climbed in, shut the door, and sat there for a minute with my hands on the steering wheel while my breathing slowed down. The hunter never knew what had happened. As far as he was concerned, he'd fired at something in the trees and gone home. I sat there thinking about that for a while. We had been in the same woods on the same day, but somehow we'd had completely different experiences. Mine was supposed to be like every other trip. Quiet morning, familiar pack, old map. But then a moose stepped out of the trees and everything changed. I was certain that it was going to get me killed. Then Bigfoot showed up. You need to know the bones of this because 3 ski patrollers went up a closed ridgeline for a routine avalanche assessment 72 hours after a historic storm. 90-minute loop, standard protocol. What came back was body cam footage that should not exist. The footage doesn't begin with headlamps clicking on or a truck door slamming. That would be too clean, too prepared. Instead, the body cam lurches into motion already mid-stride, and I have to tell you, watching this for the first time, I actually leaned back from my monitor, because Patrol 1 is already running. Not a jog, nor a cautious walk through fresh powder. He is pushing through waist-deep snow like something is breathing down his neck before the timestamp even hits 0. Then comes the moment that stopped my heart. At exactly 12 seconds in, a figure shifts behind a cluster of wind-carved ice pillars about 65 feet upslope and 40 feet to the left. I had to scrub this frame by frame. It's not obvious. It's barely there. A large, upright shape, partially obscured by the sideways snow, steps between 2 rock outcroppings. Not a skier. There's no lift within miles. Not a rescue worker, no reflective striping. And definitely not wildlife at normal scale. Because whatever this is stands so tall that the ice pillars only reach its midsection. The camera operator doesn't even notice the shape. He just keeps trudging forward, oblivious to what's sharing his mountain. At 18 seconds, Patrol 1 keys his radio and says something that should have been the warning. Tracks are fresh, they're not melting in. This storm's burying everything except these. The camera tilts down, and there they are. Massive footprints sunk deep into the snowpack, each one spaced nearly 5 feet apart, far beyond any human stride. Some are partially filled with drifting powder, which means the creature has been pacing, moving back and forth, waiting. Behind him, still visible in frame for less than a heartbeat, it moves again. But this time it isn't standing high on the ridge anymore. It's lower now, closer, much, much closer to the camera team than anyone watching initially realized. The distance it covered between frames doesn't even seem physically possible, and nobody filming appears to notice it happening in real time. And just when you think that's the most horrifying thing hidden in this footage, wait until you see what the second camera captured completely by accident. Because while the crew thought they were documenting tracks somewhere out in front of them, something else was already watching them back from the tree line only yards away. Patrol 2's helmet cam is where the dread starts compounding. Because Patrol 1 is still blind to the creature tracking them, but a second set of eyes is now scanning the same hellscape from a different angle. And that second set of eyes sees everything. It just doesn't understand what it's seeing yet. The wind here is even more violent. Audio clipping spikes every few seconds, turning radio chatter into shredded fragments. I'd describe the storm as visually aggressive. Snow doesn't fall so much as it attacks horizontally, moving like a wall of needles instead of precipitation. Patrol 2 is facing uphill, his breath fogging the lower edge of the lens. He keeps tilting his head, squinting, trying to make sense of the ridgeline maybe 120 feet above their position. At 1 minute and 10 seconds, I've time-stamped this obsessively, the camera briefly stabilizes. Maybe he braces against a rock. Maybe he just stopped breathing. Either way, the image goes still for just over a full second. And that's when you see it. The creature is standing on that ridge, motionless and completely vertical. It is partially snow-covered, crusted white on its shoulders and head, blending so perfectly into the storm that only its outline separates it from the environment. But that outline is wrong. It's too tall by at least 3 feet, too wide through the chest, and it's not hunkered down against the wind like a human would be. It's facing directly downhill, directly at them. Patrol 2 keys. His radio and his voice has that particular crack, not from cold, but from confusion bleeding into fear. Do you guys see that ridge? There's something up there. No response. The storm is eating their transmissions. Patrol 1 has drifted out of frame somewhere downslope. Patrol 3 is even farther back, barely visible as a dark smudge against the whiteout. At 1 minute and 17 seconds, the creature on the ridge takes a single step forward. But here's what haunts me. It doesn't step downhill. It steps sideways. It's actually tracking them, parallel to their route, like it's matching their heading without ever committing to an intercept. That's not animal behavior. The team still doesn't recognize the danger of this creature. Patrol 2 lowers his camera, turns to check his equipment, and the ridge goes momentarily unwatched. When he looks back up, only 3 seconds later, the creature is gone. Not faded into the storm, not obscured by a gust, just vanished, as if it never existed. But I've seen the full footage. I know where it went. And in the next few moments, the storm gives the monster cover to do something that no eyewitness has ever captured on body cam before. Something that made me double-check that I wasn't watching special effects. The storm thickens without warning. Visibility drops to near zero for several seconds at a time. The body cam feeds flicker between white voids and brief, agonizing glimpses of the slope. Here's what I caught on my 17th pass through this section. During one of those whiteout pulses, maybe 4 seconds of absolute blindness, something changes. When the snow thins just enough to see again, the creature is now between camera angles, positioned squarely inside their route, approximately 120 feet behind Patrol 3. Patrol 3 has no idea. His camera shows him trudging forward, head down, occasionally checking a handheld GPS unit. The wind snatches away most of his radio chatter, but I managed to isolate one fragment. We should turn back. This is getting worse than forecast. He doesn't mention the creature. He doesn't even look over his shoulder. The Sasquatch tracking them remains completely invisible to his awareness, even as the distance shrinks. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, Patrol 3 stops. Not because he heard something, not because he sensed danger. He stops because he looks down at the snow directly in front of him, and his camera tilts downward out of habit. The footprints beneath his boots are now fresher than the ones he was following before. That doesn't make sense. He hasn't passed anyone. No one has doubled back. But the tracks are there, deep, wide, overlapping his own trail like something has been walking in his exact footsteps from behind. That's when the storm gusts hard enough to shake the camera sideways. I mean, violent full-body sway. The audio spikes with tearing wind, and for a split second, the lens points uphill rather than down. When it stabilizes, when Patrol 3 regains his footing and straightens up, the creature has closed another gap. You could see that it's now roughly 80 feet behind him. That's not a distant observer anymore. That's a predator that has decided proximity is no longer a risk worth avoiding. It stands motionless, half-crouched against the wind, but still dwarfing every rock outcropping around it. The outline is undeniable. Broad shoulders and long arms. A head that sits too high on its neck, angled slightly forward as if sniffing the air. Patrol 3 finally turns. His camera sweeps across the slope and misses the creature by maybe 15 degrees. He's looking too far left, too low. His brain isn't calibrated to recognize something that tall standing, that close in a blizzard. He turns back downhill and keeps moving. It's crazy to think that they still have no idea. But the damage is done. The proximity shift has already happened. The creature is no longer observing from a distance. It has entered their perimeter, and the patrol has less than 90 seconds before everything falls apart. Now what happens next will make you question every blurry photo you've ever dismissed. This is the section where everything shifts from uneasy speculation to full-blown horror. Because up until now, the patrol has been operating on instinct, moving downhill, checking tracks, occasionally glancing uphill without truly seeing. But at 3 minutes and 55 seconds, that changes. And the way it changes has haunted me for weeks. Patrol 1 suddenly appears in Patrol 2's frame, converging with Patrol 3 near a cluster of exposed rock. They're regrouping finally, drawing close enough to shout over the wind instead of relying on the shredded radio frequencies. Patrol 2 is facing uphill, his body cam aimed roughly toward the ridge they descended 20 minutes ago. His breathing is heavy, visible as fog, even through the distortion. Then he shouts. I had to amplify the audio and filter out the wind noise to catch this clearly. Something is moving with us. All 3 men turn uphill simultaneously, and the camera captures the creature clearly now for the first time. It is standing in partial profile, no more than 55 feet away, slightly crouched against the wind shear, but still towering above the surrounding terrain. The trees at this elevation are stunted, twisted, barely reaching 8 feet tall. Its shoulders clear them by a visible margin. I'm looking at a creature that stands somewhere between 8 and 9 feet, covered in dark, wet fur that clings to its frame like matted insulation. Snow has accumulated on its upper back and the crown of its head, but its face, what I can see of it, is bare, skin appearing almost gray against the whiteout. It's undeniably Bigfoot, and I think the patrols knew it too. Its posture isn't random, it isn't casual. It stands with its weight slightly forward, arms hanging but hands partially open, head angled downslope at an unnatural degree. It is tracking them, watching their every micro movement. Patrol 3 freezes, and I mean full body lockup. His camera shakes only from the wind now, not from movement. Patrol 1 raises his arm, pointing directly at Bigfoot, and for one frozen second, I think he's going to say something coherent, maybe identify it, maybe name the threat. But Bigfoot has moved. Not a step, but a repositioning. Now it stands approximately 32 feet away, having closed the gap without any sound of footsteps reaching the microphones. That's what terrifies me most about this footage. You hear the wind. You hear the men breathing, shouting, scrambling. You never hear Bigfoot. Patrol 1's arm drops. His voice comes through the distortion. Back now. They don't run yet. They walk backward, eyes locked on the shape that has somehow breached their safety bubble without making a single sound. But running is coming. And once it starts, it doesn't stop. And if you think seeing Bigfoot from 30 feet is bad, what if I tell you the hunt begins? I need you to understand what breaking distance means in this context. It's not a vehicle stopping suddenly. It's the precise moment when a threat shifts from observation to action, when whatever was pacing you decides that watching is over and taking begins. And that moment happens at 4 minutes and 42 seconds when Patrol 1 finally stops walking backward and turns to run. The storyteller in me wants to call this section the transition from anomaly to pursuit, because that's exactly what the footage shows. Up until now, Bigfoot was moving laterally, adjusting position, closing gaps during whiteouts. But it wasn't advancing directly. Now, as all 3 patrol members pivot downhill and break into a desperate, uncoordinated retreat, the body language on that massive frame changes. Patrol 2 stumbles first. His camera whips downward, catching a split-second view of his own boots skidding across ice, then jerks back up as he catches himself. When the lens levels again, Bigfoot is no longer standing in that slight crouch. It is moving, advancing directly down the slope, each step deliberate and eerily silent, minimizing snow displacement like something that has spent centuries mastering this terrain. At 5 minutes and 12 seconds, the footage shows something that made me rewind at least 20 times. Bigfoot closes distance without appearing to rush. I measured the frames from the ridge edge to the first rock outcropping, a span of roughly 22 feet covered in under 2 seconds. But it's not a sprint. It's a long, powerful stride that eats terrain in chunks. Snow bursts outward from each footfall, but the microphone barely registers it beneath the wind. Distance collapses from 32 feet to 20, then to 15 within seconds. Patrol 1 screams into his radio. I've isolated the audio, scrubbed out the static, and his exact words are shredded, but the terror is unmistakable. "We've got a large animal, unknown, moving fast." The transmission cuts out mid-sentence, not from interference, but from the microphone maxing out as he sucks in a breath to scream again. Patrol 3 glances back. His camera catches Bigfoot at roughly 12 feet now. That's close enough to see individual snowflakes melting against the dark fur of its chest, close enough to see the way its head tilts slightly as it moves, almost curious, like a hunter watching prey trip over its own feet. Then Patrol 3 makes the mistake that ends everything. He tries to turn fully, to change direction, to cut sideways across a rock face. And Bigfoot reacts instantly, not with a roar or a charge, but with a subtle increase in pace, a lengthening of stride that eats the remaining distance like it was never there. The hunt isn't beginning anymore. It's already over. These men just don't know it yet. The timestamp hits 6 minutes and 3 seconds, and I have to be honest with you. I've watched this section over 100 times, and I still flinch. Not because it's gory. There's no blood in this footage, no screams that go on for minutes. What makes this unbearable is the speed. Everything before this has been build-up, tracking, pacing, closing distance. But the actual snatching event happens so fast that your brain refuses to process it the first time through. Patrol 3 turns to run downhill. That's the trigger. He's maybe 8 feet ahead of Patrol 2, 10 feet behind Patrol 1, and he's just decided to stop walking backward and commit to the sprint. His body cam swings forward, showing the slope below. Rocks, snow, the distant shape of Patrol 1's jacket disappearing into whiteout. Then Bigfoot enters the frame at full speed for the first time. I need you to understand what full speed looks like for something this size. It's not a human sprint. It's not even a bear charge. It's a low, explosive acceleration that launches approximately 800 pounds of muscle downhill with terrifying efficiency. Snow doesn't just crunch underfoot, it erupts, blasting sideways in plumes that momentarily obscure the legs. The stride length is absurd, easily 10 feet between footprints, covering ground in a way that shouldn't be possible on this steep, ice-laced terrain. Patrol 3 never finishes his turn. Bigfoot reaches him in under 2 seconds. I've timed it, from the moment the acceleration begins to the moment impact registers on the microphone, exactly 1.8 seconds. The camera captures only partial movement, an arm extending, impossibly long, swinging down from shoulder height, then sudden, violent displacement of Patrol 3's entire body, lifted sideways like he weighs nothing. Just like that, Patrol 3 is gone. His body cam, still recording, still transmitting, shows a chaotic blur of snow, sky, and what might be fabric. Then it slams into something solid, and the feed goes dark for half a second before recovering. No struggle is clearly visible. That's what haunts me most. You don't see Patrol 3 fighting back. You don't see Bigfoot's face or hands. You just see motion, rapid, violent displacement, sideways and upward, disappearing into the whiteout like a doll snatched off a shelf. Patrol 2's camera catches the aftermath. His scream cuts through the wind, high-pitched and raw. "Oh my, it got him! It got him!" The radio feedback explodes, frequencies colliding as Patrol 1 shouts something unintelligible from farther downslope. There's nothing left where Patrol 3 stood except a deep trench in the snow, a furrow carved by something heavy being dragged uphill at speed. 2 men remain on the mountain. Bigfoot has made its first strike, and it took less than 3 seconds from first contact to complete disappearance. If you think losing 1 man in the snow is the worst of this footage, you're not ready for the next section of the footage. From here on, it becomes almost unbearable to watch. Not because the quality degrades, though the storm certainly doesn't help, but because you can hear the exact moment when survival instinct overrides everything else. Patrol 1 and Patrol 2 are now separated from Patrol 3's last known position by roughly 40 feet of vertical slope, and they both know on some primal level that turning back is not an option. They run downhill blindly. I mean that literally. Visibility has collapsed to maybe 15 feet, sometimes less. Patrol 1 leads the descent with the body cam swinging violently across his chest as he half runs and half slides down the slope. Snow blasts across the lens while his boots constantly lose traction beneath him. Patrol 2 follows unevenly behind, repeatedly looking back into the whiteout because both men are more afraid of what's behind them than the mountain beneath their feet. At 7 minutes and 20 seconds, Bigfoot reappears on their left flank, running parallel to them through the storm. It keeps pace effortlessly while the patrolmen stumble downhill in panic. The creature moves upright with long, controlled strides that barely seem affected by the terrain or wind. The body cams finally capture clearer details now. Thick, wet fur hangs dark against its body. Steam pours from its mouth with each breath, and its proportions look increasingly wrong the longer the footage lingers on them. The arms hang too low, the chest is too broad, and each stride covers an impossible distance downhill. Then Patrol 2 notices what it's carrying. Bigfoot is dragging what remains of Patrol 3 by one leg while running. The corpse repeatedly slams against rocks and frozen ground hard enough to jerk the body unnaturally. Patrol 3's helmet is gone, most of the lower half of his face has been torn away, and one arm is missing completely above the elbow. Blood continues dripping steadily from the exposed shoulder, while strands of intestine drag intermittently through the snow behind the body. Patrol 2 nearly falls when he realizes what he's looking at. Bigfoot turns its head toward them while still running, and slightly lifts Patrol 3's corpse higher, almost presenting it to them as they flee downhill. Patrol 1 slips into a buried rock hard enough for the camera to crack against stone before scrambling upright again. Both men are losing control psychologically now. Their breathing becomes ragged and panicked, while every attempt at communication collapses halfway through. Bigfoot continues pacing them from the left side of the slope while subtly forcing them downhill into open terrain. Every time the patrolmen angle toward rock cover, the creature drifts closer and cuts them off, steering them back toward the exposed snowfield. The behavior no longer feels random. It feels deliberate, as though the creature fully understands how to herd them exactly where it wants them. Patrol 3's body continues slamming against the mountainside while the creature runs beside them. At one point, the corpse strikes a protruding rock hard enough for the remaining arm to bend backward unnaturally, partially separating the shoulder from the torso in a burst of blood across the snow. A few seconds later, one of Patrol 3's boots tears free entirely and disappears into the storm, while the exposed ankle twists loosely beneath shredded thermal layers. At 7 minutes and 40 seconds, Bigfoot closes the distance again until it is running maybe 20 feet away from Patrol 2. The camera stabilizes just long enough to capture the clearest view of the creature anywhere in the footage. Blood coats most of its torso up to the elbows, fresh streaks running visibly through the fur from Patrol 3's remains. Its breathing stays completely controlled despite the incline and speed. Then the creature abruptly lifts Patrol 3's body higher with one arm while still running. The corpse folds violently backward over its forearm until something tears audibly through the wind. The abdomen partially splits open and dark organs spill downward against the creature's chest. Without slowing pace, Bigfoot lowers its head and bites directly into the exposed side of Patrol 3's neck hard enough to jerk the body sideways, while blood immediately pours across its chest and forearm. Patrol 2 begins openly sobbing while running. He repeatedly calls Patrol 3's name into the radio, despite the fact that the remains are fully visible less than 30 feet away. His words barely register through the wind because he has started hyperventilating so badly that most sentences collapse into ragged gasping. The creature disappears back into the whiteout almost immediately afterward. One moment it is visible pacing them through the storm, and the next it simply vanishes beyond the snow without any clear indication of direction. The disappearance itself seems to affect the surviving patrolmen more severely than direct visual contact. Once they lose sight of it, both men begin looking in every direction simultaneously while continuing downhill, terrified that it has repositioned somewhere ahead of them. Only 90 seconds have passed since Patrol 3 was taken. At 8 minutes and 30 seconds, the two surviving patrolmen reach a rocky outcrop protruding from the slope. The formation provides partial shelter from the wind and enough cover for them to collapse behind the largest boulder while desperately trying to regain control of their breathing. Patrol 1 nearly vomits into his face, covering while fumbling repeatedly with the GPS unit attached to his jacket. Patrol 2 keeps sweeping his camera toward the whiteout behind them, expecting movement with every gust of snow. The atmosphere during these moments becomes almost worse than the chase itself because both men understand instinctively that the creature has not abandoned pursuit. Patrol 1 eventually says the thought out loud while scanning the storm beyond the rocks. Where is it? The question hangs there beneath the sound of the wind because neither man believes they escaped anything. They are simply waiting for it to reveal itself again. Patrol 2 notices the blood first. Fresh streaks of dark red are smeared across the snow behind the rocks where they stopped. The camera follows the trail upward toward the ledge above them, and the footage captures Patrol 3's severed arm resting carefully on the boulder directly overhead. The glove remains attached to the hand. Snow accumulates slowly across the exposed flesh while the fingers move slightly in the wind. Patrol 2 recoils backward hard enough to strike the rock behind him with an audible grunt. At the same moment, both cameras tilt upward toward the ridge above the outcrop. Bigfoot stands there, motionless against the storm. The creature stands motionless on a secondary ledge roughly 25 feet above them, partially silhouetted through the snowfall. Strips of flesh from Patrol 3's body hang across its shoulders, while the corpse itself has been opened further, ribs exposed beneath shredded clothing and organs hanging down its torso in dark strands. Patrol 1 immediately drags Patrol 2 sideways from behind the rocks as Bigfoot begins descending toward them. It moves downhill with terrifying control, stepping from ledge to ledge without hesitation while heavy impacts echo through the storm. The patrolmen break into another downhill sprint the moment the creature reaches the outcrop. Patrol 1 nearly loses balance while pulling Patrol 2 through knee-deep snow as the sound of heavy footfalls behind them signals that the creature has finally accelerated into full pursuit. Then Bigfoot throws what remains of Patrol 3 downhill toward them. The corpse crashes directly into Patrol 2 from behind, hard enough to knock him completely off his feet. Both bodies tumble together through the snow, while exposed organs spill across his jacket and arms. Patrol 2 begins screaming uncontrollably as he tries to shove the remains away from himself, but he becomes tangled in the corpse during the fall and cannot regain his footing quickly enough. Patrol 1 continues downhill several strides before realizing his partner is no longer beside him. When he turns back, the footage captures Bigfoot reaching Patrol 2 before he can stand. The creature lands on top of him with enough force to drive both bodies deep into the snowpack. One hand clamps completely over Patrol 2's face, while the other grabs his left leg near the knee. Then it pulls in opposite directions. The body separates at the hip almost instantly. The sound resembles wet fabric, tearing mixed with cracking wood. Blood floods outward across the snow, while Patrol 2 screams with such intensity that the microphone distorts. The lower half of his body remains trapped beneath Patrol 3's remains, while Bigfoot lifts the upper torso by the skull. One thumb visibly sinks into an eye socket as the creature raises him higher. Then it slams his head against a boulder. The first impact cracks the helmet. The second caves part of it inward. By the third strike, blood and fragments of bone spray visibly across the surrounding snow. Patrol 1 turns and runs harder than before, no longer attempting controlled movement. The footage becomes almost impossible to follow because he is effectively throwing himself downhill in blind desperation, bouncing off rocks and repeatedly losing footing while the storm swallows everything behind him. For several seconds, the only sounds are his ragged breathing and the heavy impacts of footsteps somewhere beyond visibility. Then, even the footsteps disappear. That silence causes him to slow instinctively. Bigfoot emerges directly ahead of him through the whiteout. The creature had circled downhill again without being seen. Patrol 1 screams and attempts to change direction, but Bigfoot reaches him before he can turn fully. The impact sends the camera spinning sideways into the snow while the audio erupts into static and shouting. The footage stabilizes briefly with the lens partially buried sideways against the ground, giving a clear view of Patrol 1 attempting to crawl away through the snow while gasping for breath. Bigfoot grabs the back of his backpack and drags him backward effortlessly across the ice. Patrol 1 claws desperately at the ground while screaming for help that no longer exists. Then the creature plants one enormous foot directly onto the middle of his back. The spine breaks audibly beneath the pressure. Patrol 1's body folds unnaturally against the slope while his scream abruptly collapses into choking sounds. Bigfoot kneels over him while steam pours from its mouth into the freezing air. The camera remains tilted sideways only a few feet away as the creature hooks both hands beneath Patrol 1's jaw and begins pulling upward steadily. The skin stretches first, then muscle tears. Finally, the lower jaw separates completely from the skull in a burst of blood that splashes directly across the camera lens. Patrol 1 continues convulsing weakly against the snow for several seconds afterward, while thick, gurgling sounds spill from the ruined cavity where his mouth used to be. Bigfoot holds the detached jawbone briefly in one hand before dropping it beside the body. Then the creature notices the camera. It slowly leans forward until its face fills almost the entire frame. The details are horrifyingly clear now, thick ridges above deep-set eyes, wet blood hanging from strands of fur around the mouth, steam rolling steadily from flared nostrils. The expression itself is not enraged or animalistic in any recognizable way. The creature simply looks focused, fully aware that it is being observed. After several seconds, one massive hand reaches toward the lens. The image tears sideways into static. The audio continues briefly afterward. Heavy dragging sounds move across the snow alongside repeated wet impacts and intermittent cracking noises that resemble bones snapping one after another. Then the recording cuts to silence completely. That's where the footage ends. That's where every question begins. You've seen what I've seen. Now ask yourself, if this evidence isn't real, why did the people who reviewed it refuse to go back into the field ever again?